Welcome to Late Night Story. When the world goes silent and shadows stretch longer, some stories awaken, whispered only to those still awake. So put on your headphones, turn down the lights, and let me guide you through the quiet hours. If you're listening alone, you're exactly where you need to be. If everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world, don't forget to subscribe before you drift too far into the dark.
Story 1. My neighbor's front door has been wide open for 2 days. Since it was a sunny Friday afternoon, I didn't think much of it at first. It was 5:30. I had just returned home from work. When I saw that my neighbor's front door was open, I assumed that she was simply unloading something from her car. I went inside my own house and went through my usual after-work routine, going for a run, and then making dinner for my wife, Alice, and me. It was only in the evening that I began to suspect something was wrong. I was taking our dog, Bailey, out for her final walk of the day. It was nautical twilight, my favorite time to be outdoors. I've always enjoyed strolling around the block with Bailey in those last, precious moments when there's still enough light to see the horizon. I put Bailey's harness on her as she excitedly hopped around. Then the two of us stepped out into the cool night. After a few seconds, I looked up and noticed that the door to my neighbor's house, the one directly across the street, was still wide open. Also strange is the fact that, despite her car being in the driveway, the house was completely dark, not a single light on inside. I crossed the street. My neighbor is a 20-something named Isabel. She seems like a sweet girl, but we aren't exactly good friends. Sometimes I give her lemons from our tree in exchange for figs, and that's pretty much the extent of our relationship. Still, the sight of that open door made me uneasy. What if she had some kind of medical emergency and was currently unconscious, or worse, on the floor of her entryway? After a few steps up the driveway, the leash in my hand went taut. Looking down, I saw that Bailey had seated herself firmly on the ground, refusing to budge even as I called her name and tugged on the leash. Her ears were pricked up, her eyes fixed on the house like she was waiting for something. Though she wasn't growling, I was unnerved by her alert posture and her refusal to walk any closer to the door. I let my voice close the distance between us and my neighbor's threshold. "Isabel, it's Brian from across the street. Can you hear me?" For a moment, there was only silence. Then, just as I was about to drop Bailey's leash and walk up the steps to the house, there came a voice from the dark. "Hey, Brian," she said, before coughing once and then clearing her throat. "Sorry, I'm in the middle of dinner here. What's up?" I breathed a sigh of relief. "Hey, sorry, I just saw that your front door was open. Wanted to make sure you knew." Strangely, there came another long pause. I knew she was inside the house now, and close enough to the door to hold a conversation with me. "So what was the delay?" "Isabel." "Oh, you're so sweet to check in." "Yes, I know it's open. It's just been so hot today that I wanted to let the breeze in. I'll close it soon." "Of course. Have a good night then." "You too." With that, I tugged Bailey back down the driveway, and the two of us completed our walk. I returned home, happy that my neighbor was all right, and went to sleep. Saturday was a much-needed lazy day. I woke up at 10, ate the breakfast that Alice made, then spent some time in the backyard with her and Bailey. It was an overcast day, and by 3 p.m. or so, a light rainfall forced us back inside. Alice took a call from her sister, who lives at the edge of our neighborhood, while I went to the living room to throw on some television. Except, before I could get comfortable, I looked out the front window and was surprised to see that Isabel's front door was open again. Open again? I wondered, or was it never shut? I got up close to the window and studied the house across the street. The rain was coming down harder by then, and the thick, gray clouds overhead made it seem like nighttime. Despite this, there wasn't a single light on inside of Isabel's house. It was so dark inside that the entrance to her house seemed less like a door and more like a black, painted rectangle on the exterior wall. I turned to look at Bailey, who was laying on a nearby couch, and saw that she was also looking out the window, ears pressed against her head. She glanced at me briefly, then refocused her attention outside. I couldn't tell if she was simply people watching, or if somehow she too could sense something wrong. Just then, Alice walked into the living room. She was no longer on the phone, and she greeted me with a strange, almost nervous smile. "That was an odd conversation," she said, taking a seat next to Bailey. "Everything all right?" "I don't know. Clara saw a woman peeking into her house a few nights ago." "What?" "Creepy, right?" "And she's not the only one. Apparently, there have been a few reports on her side of town. Other people experiencing the same thing. Nothing stolen, and no one hurt, at least that Clara knows of. But it's still pretty weird. Let's make sure we lock up extra well tonight." My thoughts drifted to my neighbor. I asked my wife what this woman looked like. Like I said, Isabel and I weren't close, but I knew she had recently gone through a difficult breakup with a long-term boyfriend. It was far-fetched to assume a connection between Isabel and the mystery woman, but who knew? Heartbreak makes people do crazy things. Maybe there was some link between the two. Alice hesitated for a minute. "Well," she eventually said, "you know Clara. She's got a real superstitious way about her. She's always telling stories." "What does that mean?" "It means you've got to take this with a grain of salt." When Alice relayed Clara's description to the woman, I felt a chill run down my spine. Clara said that the woman was tall and gaunt, enough so that she originally mistook her for a man. She said that her skin looked too tight across her face, and that her eyes looked unnaturally deep-set, as though they were too far back in her skull. Apparently, when she saw that Clara had spotted her, she had given Clara a big smile before retreating into the night. Apparently, when she smiled, she had too many teeth. I was silent for a moment, unsure what to make of Clara's morbid sighting. "Love, was Isabel's front door open this morning?" She considered my question as she pet Bailey. "I think it was. If nothing else, I figure I should at least tell Isabel to be careful." I put on my raincoat and headed outside, carefully making my way down the wet driveway. Once I made it to the sidewalk, I heard frantic barking coming from behind me. Turning around, I saw Bailey in the window, her paws resting on the sill, her growls and whimpers rising over the heavy rain. My wife appeared next to her a few seconds later. She attempted, unsuccessfully, to comfort Bailey, giving me a questioning look as she did so. I gave her a shrug in return, then crossed the street. I stopped at the bottom of Isabel's porch steps and listened. Like before, I could hear someone inside, though I couldn't tell exactly what was going on. I heard a deep, wet ripping sound, like something being torn. Also like before, I couldn't see a thing inside the house. A voice called out from the dark interior. "Brian?" "Hello again," I said, only wondering in retrospect how she could have known it was me. "Sorry to bother you again, but I wanted to tell you something. Would you mind coming out for a minute?" "Brian," she repeated, tone almost reprimanding. "This isn't a good time. You always seem to catch me in the middle of a meal. It won't take long." I tried persuading. When she didn't respond, I climbed up a few steps. "Isabel, there's been some suspicious activity around the neighborhood recently. I know you like to keep the door open for the breeze, but maybe you ought to keep it shut today." "Ah, but I'm so comfortable here on the couch. Why don't you close the door for me?" "The couch? Wasn't she in the middle of a meal?" Even if she were eating on the couch, her voice sounded so close, like she couldn't have been more than a few feet away from me. Was she hiding behind the door? I climbed up the rest of the steps, trying to recall the inside of her house from the 2 or 3 times I'd been inside. I knew that the room immediately to the left of the entryway was the living room, and most likely where Isabel was supposedly sitting. I also knew that there was a light switch right next to the front door. What the hell, I thought. I'll just go inside for a minute, say hello, and then shut the door for her. It'll give me some peace of mind to actually see her instead of just hearing her voice. I glanced over my shoulder toward my own house. Bailey was still barking her head off, which was unnerving, but the sight of Alice keeping an eye on me gave me some peace of mind. It was just a house, I told myself. Just a normal house with my own neighbor inside of it. Taking a deep breath, I stood at the threshold, shocked at how, Despite my closeness, the inside of the house remained pitch black. I thrust a hand inside, and it disappeared like I dipped it into oil. As I groped around for the light switch, my fingers brushed against something solid, something fleshy. I jerked my hand back, certain that I just touched a person. "Isabel," I asked the darkness, and then, from inches away, came the sound of laughter. The laugh was deep, gravelly, and mocking. It did not resemble my neighbor's voice in the slightest. Before I could react, I heard the quick pitter-patter of footsteps against wood. It grew quieter and quieter, and I realized it was the sound of someone running away from me. After a few seconds, I thought I heard a door open and shut in the distance. The back door, perhaps? Again, I stuck my arm inside, and this time I was able to find the light switch. I turned on the light and was relieved when the interior of the house revealed itself to me. A normal entryway with a normal coat rack and a normal shoe rack. No eerie intruders in sight. However, the relief was short-lived, because when I stepped inside the house, I turned to the left, walked into the living room, and was greeted by the sight of my neighbor, or at least what was left of her. She was splayed out atop a red-stained couch, her head lolled off the side. Her empty eye sockets and toothless, wide-open mouth looked like 3 holes had been dug into her face. Her face itself was red, not, as I initially thought, because it was covered in blood, but because it was missing its skin. She had been flayed. Not only her face, but her arms and the top part of her torso. It looked like someone had been methodically working their way down her body until I had interrupted them. Paralyzed by fear and confusion, I stood in place. I waited to wake up from a nightmare. I waited for Isabel to walk in from an adjoining room and tell me that I was looking at a Halloween prop. I waited for a dangerously long time, and then I staggered out into the rain. When I returned home, I immediately called the police, though I had trouble putting what I'd seen into words. They arrived quickly, took my analysis statements, and then went across the street to investigate. It's been days now. They haven't told me anything, despite my repeated calls to the station. I can't get answers, can't sleep, can't eat. I just keep replaying the discovery over and over in my mind's eye. The voice, the feeling of brushing against a body in the dark, and of course, the sight of that poor girl's mangled corpse. I have too many questions to count, but 3 rise above the rest. Who the hell was I talking to? How did they sound so perfectly like my neighbor? And why is it that every night since I found the body, Bailey hasn't stopped sitting by the front door and growling? Story 2. I'm being kept alive as an organ farm. I can't get infections. I can't get sick. I regrow my organs in a matter of seconds. I can regenerate a liter of blood every 10 seconds. My limbs aren't an issue either. I have what can be best understood as a massive healing factor. I've always had it. The healing factor. Ever since I was a kid, I've never scraped my knee, never caught a cold, never had to go to the nurse, and never broken a bone, despite participating in various sports. Everybody initially assumed I had a strong immune system, or was simply lucky. I went most of my life believing I was just a lucky guy. When I went in for my vaccinations, the doctor said my skin was unusually thick, and they had to inject me quickly and remove the needle even quicker. I never even got drunk. No matter how many shots I took, I never got even tipsy, nor did I ever vomit. I always attributed that to some sort of immunity. Nothing I smoked in my teens got me anywhere either. I was in a car accident when I was 22. It was bad. I rolled 4 times and ended up crushed between a car that rear-ended me in a tree. The car was totaled, and I should have been, too. I thought I was dead when I saw my shattered leg begin to crack and force itself back together. When the blood that poured out of my head suddenly became a trickle, then nothing. What eyesight I had left in my eyes came back just as quickly. Doctors called it a miracle that I walked away from that accident. Most that had to be done was cutting me out of the car. I knew what I saw, but the doctors told me I was probably just hallucinating from the accident. When I didn't have even a little whiplash in the morning, I went to the hospital. I thought I was in shock, and I wanted to make sure nothing was wrong, not even a bruise. The doctor sent me home that night, and when I got home, I needed to be sure of something. I grabbed a kitchen knife and cut into my left index finger, just enough to cut through the very tip of the finger. It hurt like hell, but as I suspected, the bleeding only lasted for a moment, and the tip was back. It looked exactly like the old one, and I knew I wasn't hallucinating since my disembodied fingertip was still on the counter. This should have been the discovery of a lifetime, and for a brief second it was. I ran to the hospital and chopped my finger off in the lobby. I let the disembodied digit hit the floor to the terror of everybody in the office, but within seconds, the finger was back. I grabbed my old finger and showed it to the nurses who surrounded me. Whispers of magic tricks went around until I chopped my hand off. Blood spewed for only a second, like the last bits of water stuck in a shower head, then stopped. My palm came back, then my fingers. Within moments, I was on the news. The miraculous healing man was one headline I still remember. I was a celebrity, I was a philanthropist, and I had it all. I lived off of donations and whatever blood drives were willing to give me. I ended the blood crisis. I have O blood, so I can give to anybody. A lot of my days were spent playing video games, while a nurse tracked how many blood bags I produced in 8 hours. Occasionally, the nurse would have to phone a friend to get more bags. If I drank a lot of water that day, well, they'd fill up quite fast. My body healed around the needles, so prying them out was a bit of a chore. Eventually, I discussed it with the nurses to just keep the needle in there. It honestly wasn't worth the hassle, and since I declared this my full-time job, it wasn't like I was worried about what work would think. Sleeping with it in was a bit weird, but you get used to it. When I got a call from one of the many nurses who serviced me, asking if I was willing to personally donate my kidney to her son. I didn't know what to do. At that point, I wasn't sure if I could or couldn't regrow organs. I had a bit of a crush on her, though, so I went through with it. According to the doctors, the biggest complication regarding the surgery was figuring out how to actually keep my body from closing up the incision. They just had to have somebody constantly scraping the area with a scalpel to keep it open, alongside keeping me pumped full of anesthetics, as my body fights them off quickly. All in all, it was a success, and by the end of the day, I was back home giving blood again. I went back the next day, and yep, I had 2 fully functioning kidneys. There wasn't even a scar left from the incision. That's when a doctor entered the room and sat down with me. An 8-year-old boy needs a kidney. Are you willing to go through the surgery again? I didn't think, I just agreed. Later that day, the boy had a functioning kidney in him, and I wasn't left with any less than what I started with. They kept me in the hospital overnight. I wasn't sure why they never made me before, but I didn't really care. With all my donations, blood and organ-wise, paying for the surgeries or hospital stay was an issue. At this point, people still donated money to me directly, and I didn't mind losing a day of blood donations. When I woke up that morning, a little girl was sitting down next to my bed, and a scrub-laden doctor sat up out his chair. This is Samantha. She's going to need a heart transplant by next month or she'll die. Are you willing? I wasn't sure if the removal of my heart would kill me. I regrew a kidney twice in 3 days, and I was confident. That little girl had a heart at the end of the day, and so did I. They didn't permit me to leave then either, but I understood that one. I was starting to get homesick at that point, and tried to check out in the middle of the night, but was stopped by various nurses begging me to stay, telling me about all the organs a hospital needs, how understaffed they are, how quickly they could solve major world problems if I just stayed a little longer. I gave 3 people a chance to live normal to semi-normal lives so far. I gave so much blood that at the time, I never saw any ads or blood drives, so why stop now? I figured I'd be a hero if I did this. I'd be a legend. I probably already was. I decided to go back to my room on the condition that a nurse gets me takeout and a Red Bull. I had both by the time I showered and made my way back to bed. After I ate, a doctor came in and put a large notebook on my desk, and it was every organ transplant needed in the hospital and how much blood would be needed. He asked if I would be okay to do these surgeries, and that they would take more organs out per surgery to maximize efficiency. They'd take my blood during these surgeries I looked at the names. Every one of them was a life, a person who would mildly inconvenience me. But in return, I'd give them life. I'd give them a chance. I agreed and was rushed to surgery. This was the first time they didn't put me under anesthesia. I tried to fight, but they gave me just enough so that I couldn't move, but could feel everything. The needle in my skin, their hands haphazardly digging through me to collect my organs. Skin grafts were taken. I don't even know what they did with them. My plasma was siphoned out, and they stitched me back up. Once the anesthesia wore off, I decided to leave. I fought through the doctors proclaiming how much a miracle I was, and how much I was going to do for people. I didn't care. I wasn't a guinea pig. I'm a human. Still, I tried to go, but I felt a small prick, and I was out. My healing factor is incredibly strong. So strong that during blood donations, my body would heal over the needles. So strong that doctors had jokes about me absorbing their tools. God knows how many are stuck inside of me as I write this. I doubt they bother extracting them anymore. I can heal around things, and that's what I woke up to. Both of my feet had been split open, and the bars of the hospital beds had been inserted through them. I was healed in my bed. No amount of struggling managed to free them. Normally, I would have just cut them off and hide until they grew back. This was a hospital room. There was no equipment around me since I couldn't get sick, and there was nothing to free myself with. Day after day, I was rolled into rooms, given barely enough sedatives to keep me from moving too much, damaging my valuable organs. The doctors and nurses would see me staring and talk about my miracle, and how I was such a good person for doing this. They spoke like I wasn't there. I could barely open my mouth to moan in pain, but every time they just shushed me like a toddler having a tantrum and continued to cut and pry. Several people needed to scrape the incisions so they wouldn't close. Clumps of ribbon flesh littered the floor after each surgery. They closed my blinds and took my phone. The only two remnants of my life I still had. Now I couldn't even know if it was a good day outside or not. They must have caught on to me staring. They didn't want to damage my valuable eyes. I constantly had a nurse in the room, but I rarely spoke to them. All they talked to me about was some sick miracle I had. Then talk about how little Susie gets to live a normal life while I'm stuck here being torn open and left there to heal. They stopped even sewing me up. They didn't want to waste any resources, so they just left my empty cavity open to heal over. Have you ever smelled blood? Probably, yeah. Have you ever smelled your own organs? Have you smelled what should have killed you? Seen what should have done you in for good? God, why was I given this ability? I don't even know what year it is anymore, what day it is, or how many of my organs litter the general populace. How many people have I saved? It's all a number at this point. I used to get letters and gifts, but now I sit in a dark hospital room that rarely gets cleaned. I'm lucky if they remember that healing factor or not. I gotta use the restroom every now and again. I'm lucky if I get a candy bar on Halloween or a small Christmas tree placed in the room. I'm lucky if they remember I'm still alive. During one of my surgeries, as I was staring into the fluorescent lights, hoping that maybe it was the light, I overheard a conversation and finally some unfamiliar pain. You get used to being ripped open and torn into. I wasn't used to this pain. It was a novel. The one thing I had left was pain, but at least it was something new. I looked down as they began to cut into my leg, tearing it off roughly. A small spurt of blood came out before the wound became a scab, then a lump, now the other one, then my arms. I could only look at the doctors as they threw my legs into a freezer. One of the nurses began to speak. Do you think it's really going to make a difference? As long as we don't tell them where it came from, do you think starving children care? At this point, I think I was so jaded that the idea didn't seem strange. I existed as a living organ factory. How much worse is it to be an infinite food source? They started taking my legs at least once a day, my arms twice. I guess my healing factor has limits. My legs take an entire day to grow back when my organs are damaged, and whenever my legs begin to heal, they get cut off again. I don't fully understand my healing factor, but I understand the following. I can't age, I can't get sick or have infections, I don't need to eat much, but it heightens my abilities, and people who get my donations don't get my abilities. I do know a few more limitations. If my entire body is very heavily damaged, my body will focus on the most important organs like the heart rather than healing my legs. Without food, healing slows, and now I know of another. I waited until my arms were back to write this, and I'm missing a finger. My other hand is much smaller. It looks like it belongs to a 9-year-old instead of me, however old I am, but it is stuck onto the arm of an adult man. Constant removal and healing must have damaged me. That's why I'm writing this. That's why I'm posting this. I want people to know where the organs are coming from. I want to find a nurse or somebody who can impersonate one to shoot me right in the head where you know it will kill. They haven't touched my brain, and it's my one hope for death. It's the one unknown I have. It's the last hope I have. Don't slip my neck. It'll just heal. Nothing along those lines will work. I need to be shot dead, or just shot. I need some closure. Either I'll know that I can't die and I'm stuck like this, or it won't be my issue anymore. Last night, I managed to pickpocket a kind nurse who was willing to get close enough to me to allow me to steal it. I can almost assure you, right now, that when they do eventually figure out I have the phone, they'll find a way to make sure nobody gets close enough for me to steal another. I know I'm selfish. I want to get rid of what could be a life source for millions. I've given so much. I think I deserve just one thing. I don't know if it will even work, but please, somebody shoot me. At the very least, it will let me know there's no way out of this. At the very least, I'll have that bit of closure. So, please, if you're a nurse or other medical professional, ask for the man who regrows organs. If they take you to me, please don't hesitate. Shoot me. Story 3. I met an isolated tribe in the Amazon forest. They let me into their most sacred ritual. The first time I saw a member of the Anura tribe was on the banks of the Iroquois River. The guide had stopped the boat so I could use the bushes, and while I was doing that, a face painted in bright red stared at me from the trees. It almost knocked me off my feet. The figure soon came closer, and I saw it was an indigenous man. He wore a necklace made of seeds, his body covered in urukum patterns, a bow and arrows in one arm, and the days catch in the other. The guide walked toward him with his arms open to show he carried no threat. He spoke in one of the local languages, and the man relaxed. He is Anura. The guide turned to tell me with a grin, the ones you came here to meet. They exchanged a few more words, and then the guide motioned for me to follow. I obeyed, carried away by the adrenaline of meeting in person what I had only read about in an obscure article published a year earlier, the Anura, the healthiest people in the world. As an anthropology researcher, the information about Anura's health and lifestyle was fascinating, and as an adventurer, traveling to the Amazon to meet its native peoples had always been on my bucket list. I emailed the author of that article, the same guide leading me now, and we arranged a trip. It was a long journey from Berkeley to Manaus, and from there to the closest town near the Javari Valley. The guide had warned me that very few people ever had the courage to come this far, but it was definitely worth it. This could mean a book contract, a class to teach at the university, and a complete change in my life. And in fact, my life did change, but not in the way I imagined. We followed the man for half an hour through the dense forest, surrounded by a swarm of mosquitoes. I used the time to go over best practices with the guide, who was also an academic. He studied isolated tribes in the Javari Valley for 2 decades, and recently had met the Anura. They lived mainly on fish and cassava flour, but had the most impressive longevity he had ever seen. The tribe had a little over 40 members, including 5 who were believed to be in their 90s, something almost unheard of among indigenous communities. The younger members were tall, lean, and strong, with teeth white as clouds. There had never been a recorded infant or childbirth death, and the last illness in the community had occurred more than a year ago. For personal reasons, the guide decided to spend a few months among them to investigate the source of their unusual health. That's when he wrote the article. He told me all this between his coughing fits that had been getting worse since we left Manaus. I figured he was searching for help himself, though from the sound of that cough, it seemed hopeless. And you? Any problems? He asked with joking tone. Maybe it's time to get healthy. I laughed, pointed at my thick glasses, and said my eyes could be better. Soon we arrived at an open field of packed earth where the village stood. Some people were gathered there. The men watched us in silence, bows in hand, while the women held children painted with dark markings. The man who had led us made a sign for us to stay put and walked over the group, exchanging a few quick words. Soon after, an older man approached, wearing a large headdress of red and black feathers. I figured he was a chief. He spoke with a guide, who gave him a backpack filled with items bought in the city. The chief seemed slightly annoyed and looked me up and down, just as I looked at him, judging by his hair. He had to be over 50, yet his lean, muscular body seemed like it was taken out of a bodybuilding competition. After the exchange, the chief seemed to accept me, and we were led into the village. It was small, made up of 5 thatched houses with hammocks hanging inside. In the center there was a fire, and next to it stood a large object I could not identify. The chief brought us closer, and I saw it was a dark wooden structure, rectangular, about 8 feet tall and 3 wide. Carved into it were strange symbols, with drawings of teeth running along all its edges. The structure was fixed in the ground like a tree, and at its base lay fruits, roots, manioc, fish, and even a live deer tied by a vine. Everything was marked with something that looked like black ink, and I noticed the fish carried earlier by the man were there too. I asked the guide what it meant, and he explained that the Anura worshipped a forest spirit that appeared in the form of a jaguar, and they made offerings to it. Tonight is the full moon, and they'll have a ritual for this deity, he said, caught in another fit of coughing. Wait until then, and you'll get it. During the rest of the day, I watched the men of the tribe hunting peccary, weaving hammocks and baskets, while the women prepared fish and made the ornaments for the rituals later that night. I couldn't understand why, but the tribe treated us with indifference and even unease, especially the guide. He clearly hadn't made many friends during his last visit. I wrote everything down in my notebook in a kind of ecstasy and kept asking the guide about his theory for the health of these people. It had to be genetic, I concluded, returning to the argument he had made in his article. But he shook his head and said no, he no longer believed that. Now, he was convinced the secret lay in their diet, and above all in a herb that only grew in that region, called dabo, widely used by the Anura in their rituals as a drink. I drank it once, he told me, and I believe it's the reason I'm still alive. Lung cancer has tried to take me a few times, so they'll offer us some tonight? I asked, curious, and still processing the fact that I now knew what he had. He answered yes, though with a sad expression, and took me to houses where 2 hammocks had been set aside for us. Exhausted, we dozed until sunset, when the ritual began. As night fell, the fire now burned wide and fierce, and the men made a ritual dance that lasted about 30 minutes, alternating with the women. They appeared wearing necklaces of teeth and feathers, their bodies painted with colors I had never seen before. The entire spectacle was overwhelming, beautiful. When it ended, the guide motioned for us to sit in a circle, facing the wooden structure I had seen earlier. Its base was now piled with even more offerings, each marked with the same black dot. There the chief had already been sitting for some time, pounding rhythmically on a large gourd bowl filled with some kind of liquid. It's the dabo, the guide whispered. I could see him trembling, as if anxious or afraid. The chief finished preparing it and gave me a strange look again. At the time I thought it was disdain, but knowing what I know now, I believe it was pity. The bowl was passed from person to person around the circle, each one taking a long drink. When it reached me, the guide leaned in and said I needed to drink plenty for the cure to work. Still hesitant, I took only a short sip and passed it on to him. He didn't drink it. All I know is that the taste was awful, and almost instantly a dizziness set in. With the chanting and the fire, felt as if I were hallucinating. I turned to ask the guide if this was normal, but everything went black. I woke up tied to the wooden structure, a thick vine wrapped around my hands and legs, the same way the deer beside me was bound. My head throbbed, and the air smelled of smoke and sweat. The rest of the tribe stood in a circle around us, their bodies swaying slowly. Their eyes seemed vacant, their faces empty, and they chanted the same words over and over, loud and mechanical, as if trapped in a trance. On my forehead, I felt something cold and sticky, and soon drops of black ink slid down my face. I strained against the ropes and caught sight of the guide, standing directly in front of me, his hand dipped into a small gourd filled with the same ink. "Take this off," I begged, confused. "I can't," he said. His voice trembled, and then he started to cry. "I'm sorry for doing this. In my situation, simple animals are not enough. The offer must be higher." "What do you mean?" I asked, and he didn't reply. At that exact moment, the fire roared and then went out, as if crushed by a violent wind. Darkness fell over everything. My chest tightened. Then, from the edge of the forest, 2 blue points appeared. At first I thought they were fireflies, but soon they moved closer. I saw a shape, massive and glowing faintly. It looked like a jaguar, but far larger than any jaguar on Earth. Its body was strange, almost translucent, shifting like smoke, yet its growl shook the ground beneath me. Terror flooded my body. "Please," I screamed at the guide, "let me go." "I need to live," he sobbed, repeating. "I need to live." The thing leapt at the totem, and suddenly it was right behind me. Its jaws ripped into the offerings with frenzy, devouring fruits, fish, roots, tearing them apart with wet crunches. Then it turned to the deer beside me. The sound was unbearable. The animal shrieked once and was silenced by those huge teeth, its blood spraying warm across my face and chest. In the chaos, the vine around me snapped, and I staggered free. I ran into the forest with all the strength I had, my legs barely under me. Behind me, I heard the guide running and screaming, "Come back!" Branches whipped my face as I stumbled forward, blind in the darkness. Then he caught up, slammed into me, clawing my arms, screaming and crying. We rolled on the ground, biting, scratching, locked together like animals. My glasses shattered and slipped from my face, and through the whole fight, I could still hear the footsteps of that thing coming closer, heavy and thunderous. I managed to break free when his coughing fit returned in full force. I stood and left him on the ground, now marked with the same black ink that had been on his hand and on my forehead. For a moment, I didn't even realize what I had done. When the creature reached the spot, I was already running again. Behind me came the guide's screams, louder and louder, followed by the tearing sounds of teeth ripping through flesh. His cries were high and terrible, nightmare-like, and I swear I heard him yell, "I need to live," one more time before it stopped. I ran until my lungs burned. Luckily, I remembered fragments of what I had seen earlier that day and finally reached the river. I walked along the bank for nearly an hour until I found the boat. Hands shaking, I started the motor the way I had watched him do it, and it worked. But I must have done something wrong, because I pushed off into the current for nearly 2 hours before the engine suddenly died. I tried again and again to start it, but nothing happened. At last, I realized I was too tired to fight anymore. My body collapsed on the wooden boards, and I fell into a heavy sleep. It was only the next morning that a merchant boat woke me, shouting in Portuguese. Back in Manaus, I had trouble telling my story to the authorities. That region was restricted, requiring special clearance to enter, which I did not have. And the guide, they told me, had been under investigation by the local police for 6 months. He had once been a respected researcher, but as his cancer worsened, he became entangled in land disputes, selling his expertise to illegal loggers and even blackmailing tribes in exchange for access and resources. That's why they didn't love him back there. In the end, they let me go, maybe thinking I had already been through enough. And it was only on the flight home, as the plane crossed the endless green and the winding rivers of the Amazon, that I noticed something different. Through the window, I could see the details of the trees, the water, and the clouds in the sky, even without my glasses. My vision was healed in that ritual, and the guide became my offering. Story 4. A Better Sibling. We had been searching for 3 hours when Sean finally figured it out. I'm not sure if it was our hushed tone or our hesitation at the trail intersections we came across that gave it away. "Are we lost?" he asked. I shuddered at his worried voice. This weekend was supposed to be an opportunity for me to bond with my younger brother, and he had begun the overnight hike with such excitement and exuberance. Now, we were deep in the woods, far into our phone's no coverage zone, and my father and I had to break the bad news for which I was responsible. Dad crouched down to Sean's height. "Yes," he said, "I did want to get you worried, because I've been to these woods before, and I thought I could find a way out of them. But I'm afraid your sister, and I don't really know where we are." Sean's eyes grew wide. He was, after all, still at an age where he viewed his father as infallible and his much older sister. The 10-year age gap had made me almost a replacement for our long-absent mother. Now, I fear that my mistake had shattered this image. "But it's okay, son," my dad continued. "We packed for an overnight trip, and we'll be fine. If we still can't find any of the main trails, I have an idea that I'm sure will bring us to safety. We'll be back at home tomorrow night, just like we planned." "But what about the map?" asked Sean, looking up at me. I felt the color drain from my face. I stuttered, ashamed. "Your sister seems to have lost our map," said Dad. He shot me a stern glance. "But it's okay. You don't need to worry. We'll figure this out together, as a family." I don't know how it happened. Dad had put me in charge of the map when we had parked at the edge of the Rich Mountain hiking trail that morning. Everything had gone so smoothly at first. I led us down a half-mile dirt path that, like the rest of the Appalachian woods that stretched through southwest Virginia, was lined on both sides with the vibrant colors of early fall leaves that decorated oak, maple, and birch trees. We arrived at the swimming hole at the base of a long cascade, a common stop for families looking for an easy outing, and proceeded to spend time playing in the water and then picnicking with food we had packed. After we had dried off and changed back into our hiking clothes, we began the much longer trek to a prominent deep woods campsite, where we planned to spend the night before returning home the next day. The coolness of the morning air faded into a strong midday sun. Dad and I sweated under the weight of the 2 tents and camping equipment we lugged on our backs, but the trail was mostly flat, and we quickly got used to the burden. Dad directed us at first. We split from the prominent trail onto a smaller, less well-maintained dirt path, and then onto another, even narrower one filled with rugged small rocks. It was barely a path at all, as, from any distance, it was hard to distinguish from the surrounding woods. After a few hours of this, Dad commented that the territory we were going through looked unfamiliar to him. "So we'd better take a look at the map." We rested in a clearing, while Sean was climbing up a large stump, proclaiming a throne upon which he sat as king of the woods. I fished through the items I was carrying to find the map. My dad stood over me, patiently. "You all right there?" he said, noting the worried expression on my face. "It's not here," I whispered, not wanting to worry my brother unnecessarily. Surely it would turn up before long. But it didn't. My dad and I looked through our respective backpacks, and even Sean's small knapsack. The map was nowhere to be found. "When was the last time you saw it?" asked my father. I responded that it had been at the swimming hole, right as we were packing up our belongings again. We exchanged a concerned glance. "Don't worry," said my father, reassuringly. "We'll figure this out." That was 6 hours ago. We tried, of course, going back the way that we came. My father had always had a good sense of direction, so we followed his lead through several windy paths. Occasionally, I would feel like I recognized our surroundings, only to second-guess myself. Was that the same set of spruce trees we had passed before, or a different one? It got dark only a few hours after Sean caught on. "Dad," I said, "I'm so sorry." He sighed. I felt the pain of all the times I had disappointed him run through me. Even worse was realizing that I was letting down my kid brother. "It's all right. You didn't do it on purpose," Dad said. I asked him about his other idea. He took out his compass and explained that we had generally been heading southeast all morning and early afternoon. All we needed to do was go the opposite direction, northwest, and before long, we'd be close to where we started. At the very least, we'd come across a few peaks from which we'd be able to see the surrounding valleys and determine our location. We trudged along this way for another hour before evening started to fall. The only sounds were those of the woods, insects buzzing around and gentle breezes swaying branches. Realizing we only had a little natural light left, We kept our eyes out for a place to camp for the night, eventually identify a patch of dirt largely unobstructed by trees or roots. Dad and I set up the 2 tents, one for Sean and me and one for him, and lined a space with rocks where we started a small fire with what we had gathered nearby. Dad exchanged pleasant words with us, telling us we would be back at home this time tomorrow night, as we cooked and ate the food we had packed for dinner. Eventually, Sean and I retired to our tent. Sean was worried but also exhausted from the day of intense hiking, and before long I heard the rhythmic breathing of him in deep sleep. I, on the other hand, tossed and turned with discontent. Today's events triggered other painful memories. I remember sifting through Mom's wallet, back when she and my dad's marriage had descended to the point of regular screaming matches, and using what I stole to procure the pills I craved for, pills that brought me a much-needed sense of contentment. The look of disappointment Dad had given me earlier today had been the same as when he caught me taking more money, this time from my own brother's funds for a field trip, to feed my addiction. Now, I wanted so badly to be a better sister, but here I was again letting him down. Unable to sleep, I emerged from the tent and returned to the fire. It was dying out, with only a few embers emitting light, and in this half-darkness I could see my father sitting there, leaning against his heavy backpack and whittling a stick with his hunting knife. "Can't sleep," he whispered. I shook my head. "I understand," he said. "Don't be too hard on yourself. I'm proud of you, honey." I must have continued looking downcast, because he continued trying to cheer me up and even apologized for his many work-related weekend absences from home. We sat together quietly, staring into the fire for a few moments before he got to his feet. "I'm going to see if I can get some rest for tomorrow. You should do the same. When you're ready, just make sure to put out the fire when you go." With that, he entered his tent and left me alone. I sat for a minute, observing how the woods seemed ominous and foreboding at night. Glancing at the opening of Dad's backpack, I glimpsed the lid of a prescription box in a flicker of light from the dying fire. In other circumstances, I would have left it alone, as my youth rehab program had taught me. But I was so distraught at the dire situation in which I had placed my family that I guiltily reached for it, hoping to find something that could improve my mood. I didn't imagine that the box would contain the painkillers I craved for, but maybe it would have something that could help me relax. I held the label in front of my eyes. Allergy pills. I sighed, disappointed in the contents and in myself, and reached into Dad's backpack to return the container. My hand felt a thick, folded piece of paper. My heart sank as I realized what it was. I quickly pulled it out of the backpack. It was a map, the same one I had used to guide us to the swimming hole this morning. The guide to the entire region of woods in which we had found ourselves lost. My mind ran in circles. Sean and I had spent the last 10 hours distressed at our situation, and Dad had had the map on him all along. I felt dizzy thinking of all the implications. Had Dad taken the map out of my backpack when I wasn't paying attention, and then pretended not to find it when I realized it was missing? I recalled a point when I had been in the water with Sean while Dad prepared our picnic. He would have had a perfect opportunity to remove it then, but why would he do that? Dad had also been the one to assure us we didn't need to check the map for the first several miles, stopping me from noting its absence until we were already deep into the forest. What was going on? Where was Dad leading us? And why was he tricking us into thinking we were lost? I thought about using the map to run away, with the compass, which I also found in Dad's pack. I could surely return to the main trail and call for help. But could I leave Sean? Would he come with me voluntarily without waking up Dad? I grew angry, too, at all the blame Dad had allowed me to assign to myself. That bastard. He had watched me become overcome with guilt, while all along he was the one leading Sean and I astray. Why was he doing this? I turned on my cell phone, which predictably had no signal, and used its flashlight feature to find and pick up Dad's knife, and also to find a location on the map. I noticed a ranger station listed a bit north of US, and decided to set off there and get help. Hopefully, I would find someone tonight who would return here and help figure out what was going on. And hopefully, we would get back before Dad realized I was gone. I sat silently for a bit, trying to discern if Dad was asleep. I had a nightmarish image of him rushing out his tent to find me in possession of the map, and I could only imagine what would happen next. For now, Dad didn't realize that I was onto him, and that gave me some advantage in trying to thwart whatever he was trying to accomplish. Moving as quietly as I could, I set out into the woods. The initially flat route developed gradually into a steep ascent. I quickened my pace as I got further away from our makeshift campsite. Beyond every crooked set of branches, I saw a visage of my dad in the shadows, a man I thought I could trust. In the distance, I heard the faint sound of running water, mixed with hoots from owls and mating calls from insects. My legs began to ache as I continued up the hill, but adrenaline pushed me forward. Finally, as the perfect darkness of midnight settled around me, I reached the peak of the mountain and saw the outline of a dilapidated shack before me. I walked slowly up to the entrance, my mind somehow more nervous than before. I was a young woman alone in the woods. After all, what if what I found inside was worse than my crazed father? Hesitantly, I knocked quietly at the rusted door, then louder when I heard no response. Finally, I pushed at the door. It creaked open, apparently unlocked. At first, I saw nothing inside but darkness. The floors were wooden, the ceiling was low, and the room before me appeared barren. Using my phone's flashlight once more, I made out a long, oval-shaped mirror at the other end. Stepping closer, I gazed into the reflection of my own distraught form. My thin frame shook with worry. My long, disheveled chestnut hair at least somewhat obscured my panicked and sweaty face. In the reflection, I began to notice something floating over my left shoulder. I froze, too afraid to turn around and see it directly. A translucent, wispy shape appeared behind me. For a moment, I saw its murky texture swirl together to form a barren face that consisted only of eyes and a nose. Then, a mouth grew into it, and the entity let out an inhuman moan. I panicked at this, stumbling to the corner of the room and tripping over an old piece of carpet. I felt myself fall to the ground, and then through the floor onto the dirt below. I drew Dad's knife and held it out toward the gap above me, prepared to swipe it at anything I saw. But nothing came, so I looked around and examined my surroundings. What I found there shocked me even more than the shape that had appeared a moment earlier. I found myself surrounded on all sides by bones. Human bones. Hundreds of them. I felt like I was about to pass out from the stench and from the horror coursing through my body. But even what I had seen so far did nothing to prepare me for what I was about to witness. There was one body that consisted of more than bones. It was still lined with decomposing flesh, and it smelled the worst of all. I dropped the knife and vomited immediately after my phone's light gave me a better look at it. It was my dad. His head and torso lay a few feet from me, and I saw a leg about a yard away. The dirt underneath was stained a deep auburn red. At last, I heard footsteps creeping close to the hole in the floor where I had dropped down. Frantically, I shined my phone's light around the room, noticing a small gap in the wall. Crawling as fast as I could over the remains that littered the area underneath the floor of the shack, I slid through the hole and found myself back outside. I took a brief moment to get my bearings, and then I sprinted down the hill as fast as I could, heading in the direction of the campsite and never looking back. When I was close to the bottom of the hill, long outside the building, I finally stopped. I hadn't realized how out of breath the journey up and down that hill had made me, panting. I sat down against the back of a tree and noticed the first glimmers of morning light appearing on the horizon. I went through it all in my mind. The mirror, the shape that formed behind me, the area between the floor and the dirt. Not really a basement and more like a crawl space, littered with human bones and my dad's decomposing body. Of course, if that was my dad, then who was leading Sean and I into the woods? This person who had shown such love and affection towards us. This couldn't be our real dad. Our real father was dead, and had been for some time, judging by the body I had seen, and this imposter had taken his place. Our real dad would never pretend to be lost like this, much less falsely place the blame on me for it. But how was any of this possible? I didn't have time to grieve. I knew at that moment that I had to stop the man in the campsite from achieving his goal. I didn't know what that goal was, but I knew it involved Sean and me. I crept slowly back to where we had set up our tents. It was still early in the morning, and hopefully both my dad and Sean had not noticed my absence. Dad's tent was shut and looked no different from when I had left it. I returned the map and compass to Dad's backpack and threw water on the last few embers of the fire, which I had forgotten to put out in my earlier panic. I carefully unzipped the door to my tent and crawled inside of it. Thankfully, Sean was still asleep. Quietly, I pulled a towel from my backpack and wiped off sweat from all over my body. If the thing pretending to be Dad came along, I wanted to think I had been asleep in the tent, not running through the woods all night. I lay down on my pillow and tried to think of a plan of some way to lead my brother and me out of this nightmare. Quickly, I decided the best thing to do was to wake up Sean, tell him some story to convince him to follow me, and take him in the woods with me, as far away from Dad's imposter as we could get. I could use the compass and map to find our way back to civilization. From there, I could convince the authorities to check out the abandoned ranger station in the woods. Upon finding the bodies, they'd know I was telling the truth. It wasn't a great plan, but it was all I could come up with. No sooner had I resolved on this course of action than I heard footsteps approaching the tent. I braced myself, not sure what was outside. A moment later, the thing that was pretending to be my father shouted, "Good morning, kids! Rise and shine. Sorry to wake you so soon, but we need to get an early start if we're going to find our way out of here." Sean stirred as I realized that I had missed my chance. Within a half hour, we had eaten a light breakfast and packed up our belongings. Sean and it both noticed my unease, and both assured me that I didn't need to beat myself up for losing the map. "We'll figure this out soon," said Dad, patting me on the back. He was being so unusually kind and sincere that I nearly bought into the act. After a couple miles hiking in the direction of the road, I guarantee we'll find our way back to the main trail. The forest looked so much more welcoming in the daylight, and my father was being supportive. He optimistically insisted that our trip would end up being the same overnight camping experience it would have been had nothing gone wrong. Sean even returned to his more typical jovial mood. That's when I started second-guessing myself. I thought about how I was lying in the tent, right where I tried to go to sleep only a few hours earlier. When Dad had called out for us to get up, the things I'd seen were simply impossible. Had I simply awoken from a vivid dream? As we began hiking up a steeper incline, Sean and I both struggling to keep up with Dad. A terrible image ran through my head of me running off with Sean when, in fact, nothing was wrong, and me pointlessly putting him in more danger in the process. "You okay, Laura?" said Dad, looking back at me. "You don't seem yourself." "I'm fine, Dad," I said. I looked him over carefully, trying to find some discrepancy that could validate my imposter theory. But he perfectly resembled the same Dad I had known and depended on for 17 years. He shrugged and moved on. We climbed higher and higher. Sean, unburdened by any heavy camping gear, was just able to keep up. But I felt so tired. Tired enough to feel like I had been out moving all of last night, not sleeping soundly as I was beginning to hope. Then we reached the summit. All around us on either side were green valleys surrounded by thick forest. Then, ahead and by a steep cliffside, was a building. Was this man an imposter, taking us to that horrible place so that our bodies would be added to the many underneath it? Or was this a different place entirely? The building before us now had a second floor, which I hadn't seen in the structure I visited last night. But it also conveyed a sense of familiarity that sent a deep chill down my spine. "Maybe there's someone inside," said Sean excitedly. I walked to the rocky cliffside. There was water running down it. "Laura, come on," called Dad. "We need to check this place out. It looks like a ranger station. If anyone is here, they can help us." He was by the building's entrance, Sean at his side. I didn't budge. "Wait here," I heard my dad say, followed by the sound of his footsteps approaching me. The stream below formed a waterfall, a cascade. At the bottom of the steep decline, I saw the shallow swimming pool where we had started the previous day. We were less than a mile from where we had parked, and if this man was really my father, he would have noticed and said that. It was entirely possible that I had been this close to the road last night and just didn't realize it. I had, after all, had plenty to distract me from carefully examining the map. "Laura, you need to come over to us," said Dad. He was right behind me now. I felt his hand grab me and nudge me in the direction of the building. We need to see if there's anyone here who can help us. We can admire the view later." I resisted and continued to stare at the water below. He stepped in front of me, smiling and waving his hand around. "You okay, honey? You seem like you're in some kind of trance. Do you have your knife?" I asked, remembering that I had dropped it in the building the night before. If my dad didn't have it, then what I experienced had to be real. "What?" said Dad. "If you have it, show it to me," I said. "Well," said Dad, pausing to think, "I don't remember where it is." "I know where you keep it," I said. My dad shot me a concerned look, something that seemed of a different character. "And where is that?" he asked. "In your backpack," I said. "With the map you said I lost." Dad's expression shifted. "Honey," he said calmly, "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have any map. You had the only one. You said we were far away from where we started." I said, my dad's eyes now cast an insidious glare. "But look down there. Don't you recognize it?" Dad turned and looked down the precipice. "Oh, it's nothing," he said. "There are all sorts of waterfalls in these woods. It's not the same one at Aldash." He never finished the sentence. Seeing my chance, I slammed all my body weight into his back. Before he knew what was happening, he was flying off the edge and through the air. Adrenaline again pumped in my whole body as I realized what I had done. I watched as he skidded off the side of the cliffs before landing on a rocky alcove hundreds of feet below. It goes without saying that his body didn't move again. I stepped back, slowly. What have I done? What if I was wrong? Every thought in my mind now turned to Sean. I looked to see him backing away from me, understandably horrified. There were tears in his eyes. "Sean, it's okay," I said, approaching him. "It's not what it looks like. It wasn't really Dad. You have to believe me." Sean now backed into the door of the building, which nudged open behind him. A form stood inside, encased in a layer of shadow. Was it a park ranger? Was I mad? Did I just kill my father and traumatize my brother for life over nothing? The figure stepped forward, reaching out for my brother. Emerging from the darkness, I recognized a figure. It was me. The other me grabbed Sean's shoulder and pulled. Sean screamed. I ran to the door as fast as I could. The amorphous face from last night. That had been me. A new me, forming just like Dad's replacement must have months ago. And it came into existence immediately after I looked into that mirror. Sean bit into the hand of the other me, causing her to loosen her grip and stumbled backwards outside. "Wait out here." I hollered at him as I sprinted by, unsure if he would listen. I darted forward and dove at the other me, knocking us both to the ground. The other me had my same circular face and green eyes, but she lacked the fright, stress, and horror that I remembered seeing in the mirror the previous night. I tried to grab her hand to restrain her, but she slammed her head into mine and knocked me onto the brittle floor, where I lay, stunned, near the hole I had formed last night. Remembering the knife I had left, I rolled close to the hole and reached down to find it. Looking for this, I heard my own voice ring out. Turning, I saw her charge at me, knife in hand. I screamed as incredible pain coursed through my body as she jabbed the knife into the left side of my stomach. I looked down and saw blood gushing out and spilling down my shirt. I collapsed dizzy. The other me bent down, her face inches from mine. She held the knife, a slick sheen of my own blood on the blade. This could have been so much easier. My doppelganger's voice had an empty, flat timbre. "Sean deserves better than you." She pulled the knife from my stomach. I cried out amidst a flood of hot, fresh pain. Her face, a perfect copy of mine, remained eerily placid. Her eyes were clinical and calculating, betraying none of the judgment I expected. I am the superior sister. As she moved to strike again, I recognized her presence as something cold and alien, a creature that saw my humanity as nothing more than a weakness to be purged. My right hand felt a strong, spherical object, just as the other me began her next strike with the knife. I slammed the human skull from below into her face with all my remaining strength. The other me collapsed backwards, blood gushing down her forehead. "You bitch," she stammered, stunned. But she didn't stay down. She didn't have to. The unholy thing recovered almost instantly. Her eyes, still filled with that cold, empty calm, zeroed in on me as she sprang up and pounced, knocking the wind from my lungs. She slammed her hands down on my shoulders, pinning me to the floor as the skull rolled away. "What's happening?" Sean's terrified voice rang out from the doorway. He stood there, frozen, his eyes wide, taking in the scene. Me, bloody and gasping, pinned to the floor by a copy of myself wielding a bloody knife. The doppelganger turned her head to face Sean, her expression shifting to one of caring concern. "Thank God you're okay," she said, her voice smooth and soothing. "This thing tried to attack me. She's the one who killed Dad. You need to help me restrain her." Panic seized me. I knew what she was doing. I struggled against her grip, but my body was weak and the pain almost unbearable. "Sean, no," I gasped. "Don't listen to her. She came from the mirror. I need you to break it." Sean nervously glanced at the mirror as the doppelganger spoke firmly. "Don't listen to her. Sean, she's trying to confuse you. You know me. You know that I've always been here for you, just like I'm here for you now. You can trust me." Tears welled in my eyes as waves of guilt and desperation washed over me. "Sean, please." I choked out, ignoring the pain. "She's wrong. You can't trust me. I stole money meant for you. I've been a terrible older sister to you. For God's sake, just run and get away from here, from both of us." Sean's eyes darted between the two of us. Then his gaze settled upon the skull on the ground. Slowly, deliberately, he picked it up, drew back his arms, and threw it at the mirror. The glass shattered on impact. With a high-pitched, inhuman scream, the other me convulsed. She didn't burn, bleed, or disintegrate. She just vanished. An eerie calm settled over the shack, broken only by my ragged breathing and the frantic flutter of my heart. "Sean," I called weakly. He approached me tentatively, unsure what to think. I mustered my depleted energy to whisper into his ear, to take a path down to the water hole below, to follow the trail there to the road, and to get help. As I lay on the ground, pushing my hand against the gushing wound, I felt the life drain out of me. Yet, overshadowing the immense pain was a creeping, suffocating terror, as I thought of what lay behind the mirror that had shattered into 1,000 pieces. Did the other me simply return to wherever she had originated? Was she still out there, waiting for another chance to emerge into my reality? The blurred form of my brother grew smaller in my swimming vision. Sean was running away, just as I had told him. Unbeknownst to me, he would get help on time, and an emergency medical team would see to it that I be brought back from the precipice of death. But in that moment, I just prayed that all the worst parts of me would bleed out in the cold dirt, and I hoped that the broken mirror had taken the rest of the monster with it, leaving a trail too faint for it to ever follow him again. Story 5. The man in my house is not my husband. So I feel a little silly posting this, but I've been at my wit's end lately and feel I need to tell someone. For context, I'm a 58-year-old woman from NC. 2 weeks ago, my husband, we'll call him Don, disappeared while working in the Pisgah National Forest. He's a senior wildlife biologist for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He was tracking a family of red wolves when he failed to radio in for the evening, and a search was promptly called. They searched for over a week, and I was told to prepare for the worst. But then, on the 10th day, he was found, at a truck stop in Brevard, no less. He'd wandered right out of the tree line, apparently, and I guess people must have seen the state of him or whatever, because they'd called for an ambulance right after. Naturally, I was overcome with relief when I got the call and promptly headed over to Mission Hospital in Asheville, finding my husband bedraggled and confused, but very much alive, still clad in the survival blanket the paramedics had wrapped him in when they'd found him. He'd lost 20 pounds and was suffering from severe hypothermia to the point where nobody on staff could explain how he was still alive. By all accounts, he should have been dead. Furthermore, it was clear that at some point he'd also taken a fall, his body peppered with fine scratches and scuffs, though he couldn't remember. Couldn't remember anything. In fact, not what happened, nor where he'd been for the better part of 2 weeks. The doctors kept him under observation for the next few days before, finally, we were allowed to go home. Which brings me to the reason for this post. So, a little bit about Don. He's a complainer. Even from way back when we first started dating. Over 40 years ago now. If you could believe it, the man has complained about everything. The heat, the cold, if somebody's running late, if it's raining. Not in a mean way, of course, and always subtle. A grumble here, side-eye there. Sometimes we'd be out to dinner, and I'd catch him gazing down at his food, and we'd share a look, and even though he wouldn't say anything, I'd know he was annoyed about something. He's what my Grammy would have referred to as a sourpuss. Anyway, I bring this up because ever since we got back, he hasn't complained a single time. I know that might seem like a small thing to you, but given how much of a prolific winner he usually is, to say this is out of character for Don is an understatement. Mostly now he just sits in front of the TV, watching rerun after rerun of old sitcoms and TV shows, something he previously would have abhorred doing, figuring the act akin to watching paint dry. Then, of course, there's the other thing. I spoke to a psychiatrist yesterday, Dr. Weiss. Nice lady. She said it's not unusual for people to experience memory loss following a traumatic experience, and that his memory would likely return in time. And while I can understand this, that doesn't account for the fact I get the feeling Don is lying to me, though I cannot for the life of me think why this would be. I know my husband. Ask any long-married wife. A woman's intuition is never wrong. Why on earth you lie about something like that? Though, I have no idea. I mean, I get he's embarrassed, but still, I'm his wife for Christ's sake. I tried talking to him about it, but he's adamant he doesn't remember a thing. I want to press him further, but not sure if I should. For instance, I read an article only this morning in Psychology Today which suggested that memory loss after a traumatic event might, in fact, be linked to the brain's natural inclination to wanting to protect itself. I don't know what to do. I feel like ever since he got back, he's like a completely different person. I suppose that's to be expected, given what he's been through and all. But still, am I crazy? Anyway, any advice on this matter would be greatly appreciated. Thanks in advance. B. Update number 1. So before I begin, I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody who replied to my last post. It's so nice to know I'm not losing my mind. Also, to the woman who said I was being insensitive posting about my husband's ordeal, kindly blow out your ass. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, I have updates. First and foremost, we got the last of Don's blood work back from the hospital on Tuesday, and aside from his white blood cell count being a little low as expected, I'm pleased to announce everything appears normal. So, no infection, no lingering effects, at least not physically. For example, I was just getting back from the grocery store yesterday morning when I returned to find Don not in the house. There had been a moment's blind panic before I eventually found him out back, standing by the tree that marks the edge of our property, our yard backs onto Pisgah National Forest, which was actually one of the reasons why we had bought it in the first place. He'd just been standing there in the rain, staring over at the tree, totally still. I'd had to call him a good half a dozen times before he'd finally snapped out of it. I felt terrible, of course. I was on observation duty, after all, and what with Don being a fully grown man, I just assumed he could be left for 30 minutes without riddling himself with yet another bout of hypothermia. Apparently not. When I asked him what he was doing, he just mumbled something about getting some fresh air, and then gone and sat back on the couch like nothing had happened. I mentioned this to Dr. Weiss later, who seemed concerned but not alarmed, and again assured me that everything was fine. Another thing, he's been getting up in the night. Something that's especially strange, as not once in all the years of our marriage can I recall him ever having sleepwalked before, and if he'd done so as a kid, his mother had never mentioned it. Something she absolutely would have, God rest her soul. I have no idea what to make of all this. A part of me wants to put his behavior down to head trauma, but we'd had a CT scan done back at the hospital, and everything came back clear. So can't be that. I know I'm probably coming off like a complete hypochondriac here, and you're no doubt sick of listening to me ramble. I'm sure I'm just overthinking everything. Anyway, that's all for now. We'll update again once I get a chance. Thanks again. B. Update number 2. I don't know how to start this post. So I'm just going to come right out and say it. Something is wrong with my husband. I followed him last night, one of Dawn's great sleepwalking adventures. I'd gotten up to go to the bathroom and was just heading back to bed when I noticed Dawn's bedroom door standing ajar. We sleep in separate rooms on account of Dawn's sleep apnea. I found him stood in the kitchen by the sink, once more with his back to me. For the longest moment, I thought he had to be looking out the window at something. A raccoon, perhaps, but then I caught a glimpse of his reflection in the window and realized what he'd actually been doing, which was Dawn had been talking to himself. Only that's not quite right. His mouth had been moving, yes, but no sound had come out. It reminded me a little of those ventriloquist dolls. The blank, glassy eyes, the forceful way his jaw slapped shut after each mimed word. And as I'd stood there watching from the hallway, a peculiar idea had struck me. Practicing, I thought, he's practicing. Why that thought exactly or what it meant, I have no idea. All I can say is that standing there in the dark, for whatever reason, it felt correct. This morning, I dragged him over to Dr. Weiss's office. I confronted Don about his behavior over breakfast. Only, of course, he didn't recall a thing. It seemed genuinely taken aback when I'd informed him about his little midnight escapade. I didn't tell him about the kitchen part, though. All other things aside, I had spent the remainder of that night trying not to think about it, and had no specific urge to relive again, and besides, it would only have upset him. Dr. Weiss tried to play it off as a simple case of sleepwalking, of course, or somnambulism, as she called it. Again, not uncommon following incidents of significant distress. I'm not sure whether she believes this, or is she simply trying to ease my mind. It's 11:58 p.m. now, and things have been getting worse. I can hear Dawn moving around down the hall as I write this, grunting and running up against my door like some kind of wild animal. I have absolutely no idea what to do. I considered briefly calling the police, but what would I tell them? That I'm afraid my husband isn't my husband anymore? If someone else has experienced anything similar, or if you have some idea of what is going on with Dawn, please let me know. I am seriously worried. We'll update as soon as I can. B. Update number 3. Okay, first things first. I think I may owe all of you an apology. Skimming back over my last post, it's clear I may have exaggerated a little in my distress. So remember that whole sleepwalking thing? I spoke to Dawn's sister yesterday, and turns out there's in fact a history of sleepwalking on the side of the family. So I guess that explains all the midnight walkabouts. Also, Dawn and I talked. Turns out the hospital had him on some kind of crazy anti-anxiety/sleep aid, and one of the side effects is acute parasomnia. Things like sleepwalking, sleep-talking, acting out dreams, and so on. I googled it, and sure enough, it's right there in black and white. I feel so silly. I showed him these posts, and he laughed, called me a daft old bird. Ain't that the truth? So, yeah, he's fine. We're fine. I don't know what I was thinking. Anyway, thanks for all your comments, and for putting up with my worrywart routine. You gals are awesome. B. Update number 4. I don't know where to begin. So much has happened since I last posted, and I'm still struggling to make sense of it all. I got a call from Mr. Hanley, Don's boss, yesterday evening. Don's dead. They found his body in the woods, about 40 miles from the sector he'd been working in when he'd gone missing. He'd stumbled into a ravine near Laurel Gap and broken his leg, and exposure had done the rest. He'd been entirely naked when they found him, what they'd initially taken for paradoxical undressing, before quickly dismissing the idea due to an evident lack of any nearby clothing. Initial talk is that he'd been dead for some time, which, if you've been following these posts, you probably got questions. If Don's been dead this whole time, who's been living in my house? I can't explain it. Not sure I'd want to even if I could. I found Don in the bathroom last night. He was hunched over the sink, shaking and moaning, his naked body covered in a sheen of sweat. I could hear what sounded like bones cracking as his body twitched and contorted. Of course, I say his body. Even with his back to me, I noted the familiar wideness of his hips, the thin lengths of gray blonde hair hanging down his back. I caught a glimpse of his face in the mirror's reflection. The face it was wearing was mine. I had barely time to scream before the Dawn thing turned on its haunches, and in a single movement threw itself through the bathroom window. I raced over the ledge, catching one fleeting glance before it passed into the tree lean, huffing and keening, and right before it disappeared, I swear I saw its outline shift. Into what, I can't say. I don't know what to believe anymore. I've spoken to my sister in Spokane, and I'm going to go stay with her and her husband while I prepare Don's funeral. This will be my final post. Just now, as I was finishing this, I heard a laugh from the tree lean. It sounded like mine. Story 6. I went to free the cows and found something older. I never imagined that a simple act of rebellion, something I thought righteous, could unravel reality itself. We were a small band of vegan activists, bound together by indignation and a thirst for justice. That night, the air was damp, the fog crawling low over the fields, muting the sounds of countryside. We moved cautiously toward the farm, hearts drumming like ritual drums, each step a defiance against a world that seemed, at least to us, indifferent to suffering. The fence came into view first, silvered by moonlight. I remember thinking how absurdly easy it would be to slip through it, how simple it all seemed. But the pasture beyond it, I wish I had never seen it. At first, I thought the cows were hiding, pressed close to the ground. Then one lifted its head, or something that resembled a head, and the illusion shattered. Its eyes were vast, black, and wet, like bottomless wells reflecting nothing at all. The shape of its body seemed familiar, bovine in outline, yet the skin was translucent in places, revealing sinews that writhed like serpents, muscles that did not obey earthly anatomy. Veins pulsed with dark liquid that glimmered under moon like stars trapped in a viscous night. One of my friends stepped closer, whispering a name. Her fear was almost polite, as if she could negotiate with whatever this was. Then the shapes began to move, slowly at first, wriggling and stretching in ways no natural creature could. Limbs bent backwards, torsos twisted like wet clay. Faces emerged, not what they should have been, screaming silently with impossible mouths, multiple rows of teeth glinting like black pearls. And the hum began, low and resonant, vibrating through the mist, through the grass, through our bones. I wanted to run, but curiosity and horror chained me. One of the creatures leaned toward us, its skin rippling, and I saw it clearly. The bones inside were alive. They bent and reshaped themselves, skeletal fingers extending from ribs, twisting around the air as though grasping invisible prey. And then it happened. One of my friends reached out. His hand met the creature's flank, and the flesh pulsed and adhered to him, black veins crawling up his wrist, merging him into it. His scream was inhuman, fractured across octaves, while his body began to warp, knees bending wrong, ribs elongating, his eyes ballooning into faceless voids. I vomited, wretched in the grass, but I could not look away. They were not cows. They were a breeding ground for something older than the stars, something that consumed comprehension itself. Every movement suggested hunger, not for meat, not for blood, but for awareness, for the fragile sanity of any who dared witness them. I felt my mind fray, thoughts that were mine mingle with alien ideas, impossible geometries, cyclopean cities suspended beneath stars that weren't ours. I understood, with crushing terror, that the farm was a gateway, and we had stumbled through it. We ran. I remember the wet slap of mud underfoot, the metallic tang of panic in my mouth, the way the fog seemed to clutch at us, slowing our flight. Behind us, the hum followed, persistent, intimate, as if tracing our synapses. My friends, I don't know if any survived in any recognizable form. I returned to a world I once knew, but I am haunted. Shadows twist too quickly. Shapes in the periphery of my vision move too deliberately. The world itself feels thin, like skin stretched over a void that hungers to tear through. And at night, when the fog rolls in and the wind carries the faintest, impossible hum, I hear it whispering. We want to free cows. We found worshippers of the void, cocooned in flesh we could barely comprehend. And now I understand. The universe is not merely indifferent. It is a predator, patient, and it waits in forms we mistake for mundane things. And I fear every night that one day it will come for me, not because I deserve it, but because it is always hunger for awareness and for curiosity. Story 7. The most messed up thing happened to me and my best friend. When I was 9, I met my best friend, Lyle. We shared the same classroom. And the moment we introduced ourselves, we realized we were wearing the same t-shirt. For years, we grew up side by side until after graduating 8th grade, when we went off to different schools. I had a few other friendships outside of Lyle's, but none were as strong. Most were shallow, selfish, and one was somewhat obsessive. Like many childhood bonds, Lyle's and mine eventually faded with time, until one day I received a call out of the blue. The line clicked, followed by a pause. "Hey, it's been a while, hasn't it?" "Lyle." I sat up straighter, gripping the phone. "Wow, I didn't expect to hear from you. How have you been?" A faint laugh slipped through the receiver. "Good. Yeah, good enough. Things change, you know? But I was just thinking about old times. Figured I'd call. Yeah, it's been forever. What are you up to these days?" "Not much. I'm back in town for a bit. Kinda strange being here again. Everything looks smaller, you know? Same streets, different feeling." I smiled despite the unease creeping in. "Yeah, I know what you mean. Feels like another lifetime." "Exactly." There was a beat of silence. "Anyway, I thought maybe we could meet up. Catch up properly." "Sure, I like that. When? How about tonight? Grab a beer, say 8? 8 works for me. Where should I meet you?" He hesitated just a moment too long. "I'll text you the place." Yeah, it'll be good to see you again." "Yeah," I said softly. "It will." I finished out the rest of my shift in a fog, barely aware of the work in front of me. Every few minutes my mind drifted back to the voice on the phone. It sounded like Lyle, sure, but there was something not quite right. Still, the thought of seeing him again after all these years kept me moving. By the time I clocked out, dusk had already started pressing against the windows. I drove home, showered off the day, and threw on a clean shirt. My phone buzzed as I was lacing up my shoes. An address, short and blunt. No name of the place. Just numbers and a street I barely recognized. The GPS led me there soon enough. A squat little bar crouched between a laundromat and an empty lot. The neon sign out front sputtered and buzzed like it was fighting to stay alive. Paint peeled off the doorframe, and the windows were so grimy I couldn't see inside. I took a breath, pulled the door open, and stepped into the haze of stale beer and low light. Inside, the place was nearly empty, just a handful of tired faces hunched over their drinks. I scanned the room, expecting to spot Lyle right away, but nothing clicked. Then, from the far end of the bar, a man raised his hand and gave me a small wave. For a moment, I thought he had the wrong person. The man was a stranger. His hair was longer now, scruffy and unkempt, his shoulders heavier, his face marked with lines I didn't remember. But when he smiled, when his eyes met mine, something stirred. It was Lyle, different, off somehow, but still carrying the faint echo of the boy I used to know. At least I thought. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and pushed the doubt aside. A lot of time had passed. After all, people change. I made my way toward him, unsure if I was imagining the familiarity in his face. "Lyle," I said, forcing a smile. His grin split wide, almost too wide, and his eyes sparkled with a kind of manic energy. "Hey, oh man, it's so good to see you. You have no idea how long I've waited for this." I raised an eyebrow, taken aback by the intensity. "Yeah, it's been a while." He leaned in, voice dropping slightly as if sharing a secret. "I've been through a lot lately. Just got out of prison." My stomach dropped. "Prison? Wait, what happened?" Lyle waved a hand dismissively, like it was nothing. "Huge misunderstanding. Totally blown out of proportion. I'll explain later. But, I actually had a favor to ask." I tensed, unsure what was coming. "I need a place to crash for a week or so. Just somewhere to lay low, you know? Thought maybe you could help me out." At first, I wanted to say no. The thought of letting someone I barely knew, or someone who had just been in prison, into my space made my stomach knot. But then I looked at him, at the familiar spark in his eyes, and I remembered all the years we'd spent growing up together. Lyle had been my best friend, my constant through childhood, and no matter how many years had passed, I couldn't turn my back on him now. Yeah, of course, I said finally, forcing a smile. You can crash at my place. A week's fine. Relief washed over him, almost visibly. Thank you, man. You don't know how much this means. I nodded, but a small knot of unease lingered in my chest. Something about him felt different. We finished our drinks and then left. I pulled onto the road, keeping my headlights low, and fumbled for my phone. Even though I didn't have a social media account myself, I needed to make sure this was really Lyle. Scrolling through profiles with one hand while keeping the other on the wheel, I typed his name into search after search. Finally, I found a profile that matched his name. No pictures of him, just a single photo. A car, the same make and model, down to the dent on the driver's side fender. That had to be him. That had to be Lyle. I glanced in my rear-view mirror. A car followed at a careful distance. It wasn't hard to recognize. The same scruffy, long-haired figure at the wheel. Lyle. Somehow, he was driving his own car, tracking me home while I ran my own investigation. My stomach nodded. Part of me felt relieved. Proof he was who he said he was. But another part recoiled at the thought of how easily he had shadowed me, unnoticed. We finally pulled into my driveway. The night quiet around us. I unlocked the door and led Lyle inside, motioning toward the couch. Here, this will be fine for tonight. He flopped down and gave me a quick, tight hug. Thanks, really, man. I don't know what I'd do without you right now. I nodded, forcing a smile, and left him to settle in. We both fell asleep to the low hum of the city outside. Hours later, I woke to a weight on the bed. My heart skipped a beat as I realized I was lying there, sprawled out as if he belonged. Lyle, what the hell are you doing? I shouted, shaking him lightly. He blinked up at me, a sheepish smile tugging at his lips. Sorry, I must have sleepwalked. I exhaled slowly, trying to calm the surge of anger. It's okay, but you need to get out of my bed. He let out a soft sigh, sitting up reluctantly. Yeah, you're right. The next day, I barely saw Lyle. He slept all day, curled up on the couch as if the world outside didn't exist. I left for work, trying not to think too much about him, telling myself he just needed rest after everything he'd been through. When I returned home that evening, a chill ran down my spine. Lyle's car was now parked in my garage. I hadn't asked him to bring it in, and he hadn't mentioned it. I opened the front door and froze. My clothes had been rummaged through, drawers left ajar, socks and shirts pulled out and tossed carelessly. Lyle, what the hell? I called, my voice tight. He lifted his head from the couch, bleary-eyed. I was asleep all day. I swear, I didn't touch anything. I shook my head, trying to process it, and then I noticed something else. The box in the garage where I kept my childhood belongings, old trophies, comic books, and school projects, was gone. Pieces of my past were now scattered across the living room and kitchen, strewn like someone had rifled through them for no reason at all. Lyle, what did you do? I demanded, my stomach twisting. He looked at me, expression blank, and said nothing. I dropped my hands on the scattered belongings, frustration and disbelief tightening my chest. Lyle, if this is how you're going to treat my place, my stuff, friends or not, you're going to have to leave. He remained silent, lying on the couch like nothing had happened, gritting my teeth. I began picking up the pieces, shoving trophies, comics, and old papers back into the box and carrying it to the garage. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of his behavior, but nothing prepared me for what came next. As I passed by Lyle's car, a strange, sickly odor hit me. Frowning, I crouched and sniffed near the wheel wells. The smell was unmistakable, rotting, pungent, unbearable. My stomach churned. Cautiously, I circled the car, following the source to the trunk. My hand trembled as I lifted it. Inside was a body, partially decomposed, the flesh mottled in gray. And then I saw the face, the unmistakable face. Lyle, the real Lyle. My knees buckled, heart hammering in my chest. I barely had time to react before a heavy thud from behind slammed into me, and the world went black. I woke to a blur of pain and panic, my arms and legs bound together. The room spun, the dim light casting long shadows across the walls. From across the room, a figure leaned against the doorway, watching me with an unsettling calm. "Did you actually recognize me now?" the figure asked, his voice soft but edged with malice. "Now that you know I'm not Lyle?" My stomach dropped. "W what? You're not Lyle." The figure stepped closer, a crooked smile spreading across his face. "No," he said. "I'm Greg. Remember? That obsessive friend I mentioned years ago? The one who was always there, just a little too interested in you." I tried to speak, but my throat felt dry, my mind racing. "I grew obsessed with you," Greg continued, pacing slowly. "Watched you, learned your routines, figured out everything about you. I stalked you for years. You never even noticed until now." My chest tightened. Why would you do this?" "I went to prison," he admitted, voice low, almost regretful. "A small stint, nothing serious, but it gave me time to plan. The moment I got out, I knew exactly what I had to do. Pose as Lyle, get close to you, be welcomed into your life again. And here I am." The horror hit me in waves. This wasn't Lyle at all. The childhood friend I trusted, the one I thought I had just reunited with, had been replaced by someone else entirely. "And now," Greg said, his smile widening, "we can finally be together like I've always wanted." Greg's smile twisted into something darker. "You know, maybe we should just end it. Together," he murmured, reaching into his jacket. Before I could react, a glint of metal caught the dim light. He drove a knife into his own chest with a gasp, then lunged toward me, pressing the blade against my side. "We'll die together," he whispered. Panic surged. My bond strained, but I wriggled, desperate. Inch by inch, I managed to slip my hands free. With a sudden surge of strength, I swung an elbow into his temple, and he crumpled to the floor unconscious. Gasping, I scrambled the phone and dialed 911, hands shaking. There's an intruder," I managed, voice trembling. "He's armed. He tried he's here at my house." Minutes later, the wail of sirens pierced the night. Police flooded the driveway, and officers swarmed inside, taking Greg into custody and tending to his self-inflicted wound. I stepped back, breathing hard, watching as they finally secured the scene. For the first time in hours, maybe days, the nightmare ended. After everything was settled, after the police had taken Greg away and the paramedics had tended to his injuries, I wandered through the living room, exhausted and hollow. On the floor, tucked into the folds of Greg's jacket, was a small, folded piece of paper. Curious to spite myself, I picked it up and unfolded it. The words were scrawled in his messy handwriting. At the top, in larger letters, it read, "To my world." A chill ran down my spine. The note was meant for me. Me, the object of his obsession. I held it for a long moment, my hands trembling. Then, with a deep, shuddering breath, I ripped it into pieces, watching the fragments scatter across the floor. Pieces of him, pieces of his obsession, gone. Story 8. Something followed us in Zion National Park. This summer, my girlfriend and I went on a camping trip in Zion National Park. We had a really strange encounter there. Now, for those of you who might not be familiar with Zion National Park, the park consists of two areas, Kalab Canyons, which has its own visitor center and sits far off in the northwest corner of the park, might as well be its own little park. Zion Canyon is the main section of the park. This story takes place entirely in Zion Canyon. Zion Canyon is a gorge carved out by the Virgin River, which flows from north to south. On the canyon floor, along the Virgin River, the Park Service has set up 9 bus stations around the main points of interest. I will use these 9 bus stations as reference points for the rest of the story. At the southmost point of the road, by the southern entrance of the park, is Station 1 Zion Canyon Visitor Center. This is where our campground, the Watchman Campground, is located. At the northmost point of the road is Station 9, Temple of Sinawava. This is the last station before the canyon walls become too narrow for vehicles. If you keep going north on foot, eventually you will reach the Narrows, which is a very unique hike at the source of the Virgin River. In the Narrows, the Virgin River is the hike. You will wade to the river against the currents, with the canyon walls narrowing in on you. Although it is technically possible to keep going as far north as you want in the Narrows, most hikers turn back when the water gets to be at their chest level. For our entire time there, Station 9, and the Narrows were closed. Apparently some hiker had gone missing from going in too deep just a few days prior. The Narrows is susceptible to flash floods, especially with the snow-capped water melting down into the canyon and raising the water level at that time of the year. One other road connects to the main road at Station 3, Canyon Junction. This road goes east to the east entrance of the park. It actually goes through a tunnel through mountain on the east. If you've ever seen those dramatic online videos of cars exiting the tunnel and seeing Zion Canyon, those videos were taken here. Station 3, Canyon Junction. For most of the year, including the time when we were there, the road north of Canyon Junction is closed to private vehicles. The park bus is the only way to reach any point north of Station 3. I'm a bit of a landscape photography nerd. This means that for me, a day in Zion doesn't end when the sun goes down. After our first half day of hiking and being in nature, I dragged my girlfriend with me to go take pictures of stars. We drove out to Station 3, Canyon Junction, parked, and walked along Paras Trail, taking pictures as we went. Paras Trail is an easy trail that runs from Station 3 to Station 1, following the Virgin River, crossing it at various points with bridges. I had an idea for an exposure from one of the bridges where the Milky Way would be reflected in the Virgin River, with a watchman in the background. To my disappointment, it was a dark night with no moon, so the foregrounds of my photos weren't illuminated well. At around 2 a.m., my girlfriend and I started heading back through the trail. We had just gotten to the main road when we heard rustling somewhere above us. We had parked in a small turnout along the main road, right next to a rock cliff. The Navajo sandstone cliff wall stood almost at a 90-degree angle next to our car. I unlocked the car with my key fob, and the blinkers blinked. This illuminated the cliff wall briefly, just enough for us to see some rubbles falling from it in gusts, as if someone or something was climbing above and kicking the rocks down as it did. My girlfriend freaked out a bit, and we quickly got into the car. The movement really stood out to us, as the night was incredibly quiet. I half expected to see a bighorn sheep in my rear view mirror as I drove off. What else can scale such a steep cliff wall? My girlfriend nervously looked behind us, but it was too dark to see anything. I drove slowly, beyond the reach of the headlights. The world was pitch black. When I tapped the brakes, a little square of retroreflective signage glowed red behind us with my brake lights. That's how I noticed the person behind us. They were running behind us. No lights, no reflective gear. Just a figure moving silently on the road. Their dark silhouette eclipsed the sign. For the brief moment, my brake lights flashed. I would not have been able to spot them otherwise. I was really creeped out, but I did a good job hiding it from my girlfriend on the rest of the way back. By the time we got back to camp, I was sure we had lost a runner. Even though we were cruising at a safe speed, they couldn't have possibly caught up to us. My girlfriend was still freaked out when I told her what I saw after we were safely zipped up in our tent. We tried justifying it, explaining it away, but couldn't really find a satisfying explanation. Eventually the chatter died down as the exhaustion of the day and night had finally gotten to us. My sleep was disturbed by a faint, distant sound. It was fuzzy enough that I tried to sleep through it, but just annoying enough that I couldn't. Eventually, when I was finally conscious enough to process what it was, it had grown a bit louder and closer. It sounded like footsteps, wet, soggy footsteps, like someone had stepped in a deep puddle in sports shoes, and now every step they took made a squishy sound. I opened my eyes and focused on the sound. The wetness wasn't the only thing odd about it. It was also rapid and rhythmic. Someone jogging, but the rhythm was too perfect. It was like a metronome. You don't realize how much natural variation there is in people's steps until you hear footsteps with none at all. It was jarring, uncanny. I reached down my phone and checked the time. 3:30 a.m. About an hour had passed since we dozed off. Not the time for a morning jog yet. The sound got closer. I sat up. The footsteps had been growing louder at a steady pace, almost as if the person was making a beeline to our tent. I shook my girlfriend awake. Somebody's outside. She sat up confused and listened with me. The footsteps sounded like they were less than 30 yards away now, almost in our campsite. We both held our breaths. Something else was off. With a jogger that close, we were expecting other sounds. Panting, breathing, the rubbing of their clothes against itself. We heard none of that, just wet, disembodied footsteps running closer and closer. It was surreal. My heart was about to jump out of my chest when the footsteps closed the final 10 yards to our tent. It was unmistakable now. Whomever was not going to just run past our sight. They were headed directly to us. My girlfriend almost let out a squeal. The footsteps did not slow down as it approached the tent. Still the steady, unnatural tempo. We braced ourselves for someone to run into our tent and onto us. Suddenly it stopped. It stopped right in front of the entrance of our tent, uncomfortably close. It was an abrupt stop, no slowing down. One moment the footsteps were there, and the next it wasn't. It was almost as if the runner had carried no momentum at all. Now all is quiet. No breathing, no shuffling. No hint that someone was outside at all. But there was no rejecting the evidence of our own ears just moments prior. We looked at each other. I had to say something. Hello? Who's there? No response. Hey, who is it? I raised my voice. Nothing. My girlfriend turned on the flashlight on her phone, and I prepared myself mentally to go outside and confront the person. I stood up, hunched over in our little two-person tent, and grabbed a zipper. It was stuck. Shit. I tugged at it. A piece of the fabric was caught between the teeth of the zipper. Tugging on it only made it worse. My girlfriend scrambled over to shine a light on the zipper, while I clumsily tried to free the fabric. Whatever little courage I had worked up dissipated quickly in the panic chaos. When I finally freed the zipper and ducked outside of our tent, darkness enveloped me. The moon was just starting to rise, but its light was negligible to me. Having just been staring closely at the zipper lit by the flashlight, I had to wait for my eyes to adjust to the darkness before I could make out anything. The wet, soggy footsteps were back, just outside our campsite, illuminated faintly by the silver emergent moonlight. I saw him. A man. He was running away from the tent now, but he was running backwards. His unnatural movements made me shiver involuntarily. It's hard to describe the way he moved. It wasn't like when a person was trying to run backwards on purpose at all. It was like if you had an animation of someone running, but you played it backwards. His front knee thrusted forward. His back leg pushed out behind him, but somehow his body would land a step behind. The attack of his steps, the follow-through, it was all wrong. This was the same figure as earlier. Now that I am taking a better look at him, I can make out his features better. A medium-build man, about the same as my height, maybe a bit taller. He was dressed like a hiker, although his clothes looked dirty, and even torn at a few places. On his feet, making that disgusting squishy sound, were a pair of those red Adidas Hydro hiking boots that you could rent at the visitor center. If you've been to Zion during the summer, you'd know what I'm talking about. I had commented on how many people had them on to my girlfriend earlier that day. Tourists like to hike through the Virgin River in them. Under the bill of a shabby cap, shrouded in shadow, was his face. He had no face, even in the faint moonlight, even in the shadow of his hat. I could make out the lack of features on his face. No brow line, no shadow casted by a nose, no ears. Where his face should be was just smooth skin, featureless, no expression. I watched him run backwards into the tree line. After what happened that first night, we decided to sleep in our car for the second night. My girlfriend and I dropped the seats in my beat-up crossover and covered the windows with flattened food packaging boxes so we could have some privacy. It was more cramped in the tent, but we felt safer. Combine that with the lack of sleep on the first night, we fell asleep pretty quickly. Sometime in the night, I woke up wanting to pee, being cautious. I perked up my ears and listened carefully for anything out of the ordinary. Nothing. I yawned, put on my shorts, and got out of the car as quietly as I could. I nearly pissed myself when I saw the man facing our car window on my girlfriend's side. He was just standing there in silence, almost touching the car door. He turned his head very slowly to face me. His featureless face looked almost swollen at places. I thought I saw movement underneath, thousands of squirming things. It was as if a swarm of festering maggots. He was drenched. His tattered hiking clothes stuck to his skin. His skin was so pale I could see the blue and purple veins under like worms. A small puddle had formed where he was standing. Suddenly, movement. I saw his shoulders flinch and his core tighten. I turned around and ran. Wet footsteps started behind me. Even in my nightmares of being chased as a kid, I hadn't been so terrified. I sprinted so hard. I almost tripped many times as I jumped over logs and rocks as I crossed other people's campsites. My breath was finally running out as I got on the main road. I started to slow down. The footsteps were not there anymore. Panting, I squinted my eyes and looked in every direction. I didn't see anything. I perked up my ears again and listened carefully. Nothing but the sounds of nature. I walked to the middle of the road, out in the open. The last thing I wanted was to be snuck up on. An uncomfortable amount of time passed. Even if he was walking, he would have caught up to me now. Still nothing. Have you ever swapped at a spider, only for it to disappear? Now you feel worse because there is a loose spider in the house, and you have no idea where it went. That's how I felt. Eventually, nature caught up to me, and I had to pee. A bad time to be so vulnerable, but such is life. I slowly walked near the tree line to do my business, still glancing around nervously. Wet footsteps somewhere in the trees. It was still an unnatural, perfect rhythm, but the tempo was slower this time. He was creeping. Oh fuck no. I pulled up my pants and got far away from the trees. The footsteps sped up. I barely got in the middle of the road when he emerged from where I was just seconds ago. I was faster than him, but I couldn't sprint forever. He seemed to always know where I was. There was no way I could lose him. I needed to get back to the car and drive away. The faceless man was running again now. I couldn't get past him on the main road. I decided to loop around and cut through the woods. I tried my best to put as much distance between us as possible on the main road before diving into the tree line. An unexpected ditch caused me to roll my ankle on the landing. Not daring to slow down, I tried my best to move straight along the direction I had cut into the woods. I exited the woods confused. If I had run straight, I would be in the B loop of Watchman Campground now. But I saw no cars around me, no tents, no campsites. Just a little dirt clearing among trees. No sound of footsteps. Was it playing with me? Shifting my weight to rest my ankle the best I can, I looked up at the cliffs around me. The Watchman Mountain was to my right. I should be right next to the campground. If I just went parallel to the mountains, I should be back at camp. I took a deep breath and walked back into the woods. The dirt beneath my feet started to stick to my shoes a bit. I rubbed my sole against the ground. Muddy, a shuffling to my left. I jumped and ran. Perfectly rhythmic footsteps were just a few feet behind me. I could feel the dampness in the air on the back of my neck. I was exhausted. A sharp pain shot up from my ankle with every step I took, and the trees were slowing me down. But the muddy footsteps behind me didn't seem to be bothered by the terrain. I felt such a tightness in my chest. I could taste blood in every gulp of air I took. The wind in my eye made me tear up. When I finally saw the campground ahead of me, I threw myself at it. I sprinted, but I was barely faster than jog now. The cold and dampness dissipated out in the open. I didn't dare to catch my breath until I finally threw myself into the car and slammed the door behind me. I turned on the car and drove. My girlfriend's confused murmurs turned into gasps and shock, and then into heart-pounding silence. We left the campground, left the park, through the little touristy town on the south of Park. Under the street lights of the town, I saw him, still running behind us, further and further back now, until I couldn't see him anymore. He never stopped chasing. Story 9, The Seventh Member. The first thing you need to understand is that we weren't supposed to find the station. It didn't exist on any map. Not even the classified Soviet documents our expedition leader had somehow acquired through his contacts at the NSF. We were there to study ice core samples from the East Antarctic ice sheet, part of a climate research initiative funded by 3 universities. 6 of us total. Myself as lead glaciologist, 2 grad students, a medical officer, our communications specialist, and Dr. Harrison, who'd been drilling ice cores since before I was born. The weather had been stable for 12 days straight, a minor miracle at that latitude. We were dozens of kilometers from the official station, working a virgin site Harrison had identified using satellite thermal imaging. The ice there showed an unusual density gradient, which he thought might preserve atmospheric data, going back 500,000 years. What we didn't know was that the Soviets had noticed the same anomaly in the early 1970s. Present late autumn. The paper is brittle, the ink bleeding at the edges. The first page of the journal was wrapped in a plastic sample bag, found clutched in a hand protruding from a fresh ice fissure. The hand was not human, not anymore. It had 4 parallel ridges running along the metacarpals, like fossilized waves. We are airlifting the entire ice block out. I shouldn't be reading this. Diary. Earlier that year, I was monitoring the drill feed when we hit the cavity. The resistance readings dropped to 0 at over 3,000 meters depth. Deeper than any known subglacial lake. Deeper than anything should exist under that much ice. The drill cam showed nothing but darkness. When we lowered an LED array down the borehole, the light just disappeared, swallowed by a space too vast for our equipment to illuminate. Sarah, one of our grad students, was the first to notice the metal, a glint at the extreme edge of our light's reach, too regular to be natural. We spent 6 hours slowly maneuvering a secondary camera through the hole, each adjustment taking forever as we tried not to damage the equipment. When we finally got a clear image, nobody spoke for a full minute. It was a door, a massive steel bulkhead with Cyrillic text etched across its surface. The metal showed no signs of corrosion, despite what must have been decades of exposure. Dr. Harrison ran the text through a translation app. Geological Research Station. Authorized personnel only. We should have reported it immediately. Protocol demanded we contact the Antarctic Treaty Secretariat, declare the find, and wait for an international team. But Harrison argued we'd lose access, that another government would claim sovereignty and bury whatever was down there. He had a point. Several Soviet air sites have been mysteriously reclassified in recent years. He'd been passed over for tenure twice. This discovery was his last, best shot at legacy. After 2 hours of debate, we voted for the 2 in favor of investigating before making any reports. The descent took days to properly engineer. We had to widen the borehole, install a pulley system, and rig a makeshift elevator using equipment meant for ice core extraction. Marcus, our medical officer, insisted on full hazmat protocols. He'd been quiet since we found the door, his usual confidence replaced by a watchful tension. I later learned he'd lost a friend on a caving expedition years ago, a loss that haunted him. The air samples we'd pulled showed breathable atmosphere, but with elevated methane, and something our field spectrometer couldn't identify, a complex organic compound that didn't match any standard database. I went down first with Harrison. I promised my daughter I'd be back for her birthday, a stupid promise to make in Antarctica. The small wooden bird she carved for me felt heavy in my pocket. The elevator dropped through darkness for 20 minutes, our headlamps creating a small bubble of light in the vast emptiness. The temperature rose steadily as we descended, from bitter cold at the surface to just below freezing at the bottom. When we finally touched down, our boots splashed in a thin layer of water covering smooth concrete. The station spread out before us like an underground city. Corridors branched off in 6 directions from the main shaft, each one perfectly preserved. Emergency lighting still functioned, casting everything in a pale green glow, some kind of chemiluminescent system that didn't require power. Our Geiger counters remained silent, but the organic compound readings were off the charts. We followed the main corridor for 200 meters before finding the first laboratory. Banks of equipment lined the walls, things that looked advanced even by modern standards. Computer terminals with designs I didn't recognize. Microscopes with too many lenses. And in the center of the room, a drilling platform positioned over a hole that descended beyond the reach of our lights. The logbooks were stacked on a metal desk, wrapped in plastic. Most were in Russian, but someone had made notes in English in the margins, dates ranging across decades. The final entry was different, scrawled in what looked like dry blood across an entire page. Let it not rise. Harrison found the crew quarters down another corridor. Beds, all neatly made except for one. The exception had been torn apart, the mattress shredded, deep gouges in the metal frame that looked like claw marks. Dark stains covered the floor, leading from the bed to a ventilation grate that had been ripped from the wall. We spent 2 hours photographing the crew quarters before anyone was willing to approach that ventilation grate. The opening was roughly 60 centimeters wide. The metal edges bent outward, as if something had forced its way through from inside. When I finally worked up the nerve to shine my headlamp into the duct, I saw scratch marks extending as far as the light could reach. For parallel grooves, too evenly spaced to be random damage. Harrison called us back to the laboratory. While we'd been documenting the sleeping quarters, he'd gotten one of the computer terminals running. Some kind of closed system that had been hardened against EMP and powered by the same chemiluminescent technology as emergency lights. The interface was entirely in Russian, but Sarah had studied in Moscow for a semester. She worked through the menus while the rest of us maintained perimeter, though what we were watching for, none of us could say. Sarah was always so meticulous. Her notes a work of art. She kept a photo of her cat taped inside her data book. The first files she accessed were personnel records with photographs that looked like they'd been taken decades ago. Young faces, mostly male, several showing the kind of eager intensity you see in researchers who think they're about to change the world. Dr. Volkov headed the team, a geologist who published papers on extremophile bacteria in deep ice cores. His final log entry was dated in late 1991. They found something, Sarah said, scrolling through data tables. Organic samples from thousands of meters down, past the bottom of the station. The chemical analysis showed compounds similar to what our spectrometer had detected in the air, but in concentrations 1,000 times higher. Amino acid chains that shouldn't exist. Protein structures that folded in ways that violated basic biochemistry. And growth rates. The samples had doubled in mass every 6 hours when exposed to temperatures above -20 Celsius. The organism required time to integrate a host. The process was slow, metabolic, rewriting the body from within. It didn't need to kill. It needed to absorb. Marcus had been unusually quiet since we'd found the crew quarters. Now he spoke up from where he was examining a sealed sample container. We need to leave. Now. We've got 3 more days of supplies, Harrison said, without looking up from the terminal. This is a discovery of the century. Look at the medical logs, Marcus insisted. He'd found a separate terminal, this one showing biometric data from the station's crew. Elevated cortisol starting week 2. Sleep patterns disrupted by week 3. By week 6, he trailed off, pointing at a graph showing neural activity readings that made no sense. Gamma waves spiking at levels that should have caused seizures, but somehow sustained for hours at a time. Our communications specialist, Chun, had been working with a handheld radio he'd found in what looked like a security office. Most of the frequencies were dead, but he discovered an automated recording on the emergency channel. The message was in Russian, repeating every 30 seconds. Sarah translated. Station to all stations. Containment breach. Do not attempt rescue. Repeat, do not attempt rescue. When was this recorded? I asked. Chun checked the device's memory. Shortly after Volkov's last entry, he played the recording again, this time holding his own radio next to it. Our equipment picked up the signal clear as day. This isn't a recording. It's broadcasting live. Now, decades later, the temperature in the lab had been steadily rising since we'd arrived. My thermometer now read just below freezing, warm enough that condensation was forming on the metal surfaces. Water droplets ran down the walls in thin streams, all flowing toward the drilling platform in the room center. Harrison was transferring files to our portable drives when the lights flickered. Not the chemiluminescent emergency strips. Those maintained their steady glow. The overhead fixtures we hadn't even realized were active suddenly blazed alive, bathing everything in harsh white light. Then, just as suddenly, they died. In that brief moment of illumination, I saw something that made my blood freeze. The drilling platform's hole, the one that descended into darkness, wasn't empty. Something pale in what was rising through it, moving with a deliberate, undulating motion, a suggestion of mass, a failure of light. Did anyone else see? I started to ask, but you cut me off. Listen. He held up the radio. The emergency broadcast had changed. Instead of the containment breach warning, we heard breathing, slow, rhythmic, decidedly human. Then a voice, speaking accented English. You should not have come here. Sarah grabbed the radio. Who is this? Are you from the original crew? The breathing continued for 10 seconds before the voice returned. We are what remains, what grows, what waits. A pause. Check your samples, Dr. Harrison. We all turned to look at Harrison, who had gone very still. None of us had used names over the radio. None of us had mentioned his role in our team. The organic compound, he said slowly. It's not just in the air. It's in the water droplets, in the surface moisture we've been breathing. He pulled out our field spectrometer, hands shaking as he took readings from his own exhalation. The display showed traces of the unknown compound, low concentrations but present. That's when we noticed Chun was missing. He'd been standing right beside us 30 seconds ago. His radio lay on the floor where he'd been, still broadcasting that awful breathing sound. But Chun himself was gone. No sound of footsteps, no call for help, just absence. We searched the immediate area, calling his name. The laboratory had only one entrance, the corridor we'd come through. He couldn't have left without passing directly by us. Yet the room was empty except for our remaining team and the equipment that had been waiting here for decades. The breathing on the radio stopped. The original emergency broadcast resumed its endless loop. Containment breach. Do not attempt rescue. Marcus was already backing toward the exit. We're leaving. Now. No arguments. But as we reached the corridor, we found fresh scratches on the walls. For parallel lines, leading away from the laboratory, leading deeper into the station. And at the first intersection, Chen's equipment vest lay crumpled on the floor, torn in the same pattern we'd seen on the bed in the crew quarters. From somewhere in the darkness ahead came a sound that wasn't quite human anymore. It might have been Chen's voice, if Chen's voice could stretch and distort like heated plastic. It spoke 4 words that echoed Volkov's final message. Let it not rise. The drilling platform behind us hummed to life, its mechanical systems engaging with a sound like breaking bones. Present, late autumn. The handwriting changes here. It becomes a jagged scrawl, the letters pressed deep into the paper. The narrative continues, but the voice is different. It's faster, desperate. I can smell the ice core samples we extracted from near the body. They contain the same unknown organic compound described in these pages. Diary. Timestamp unclear. The drilling platform's mechanical whine filled the laboratory as we backed toward the exit. Harrison grabbed the portable drives, but I could see his hands trembling, not from fear, but from something else. His pupils had dilated to pinpoints despite our bright headlamps. We need to find Chun, he said, but his voice carried an odd harmonic, like 2 people speaking in unison. Marcus pulled me aside. Look at his neck. For thin lines ran parallel beneath Harrison's collar. Not cuts, more like something pushing up from underneath the skin. As I watched, they pulsed with his heartbeat. We made it down the corridor before the emergency lighting failed. Our headlamps carved useless cones through the absolute darkness. The station's layout, which had seemed straightforward minutes ago, became a maze of identical passages. Our boots splashed through increasing amounts of water, all of it flowing in the same direction, toward the laboratory we'd just fled. Sarah stopped abruptly. Listen. Footsteps, dozens of them, moving through the water somewhere ahead. Not the chaotic scramble of panic, but measured, synchronized. Then voices, speaking Russian in that same double tone Harrison had developed. Audio recorder, timestamp noted. I whispered into my device. Team separated from Chun. Harrison showing signs of infection. Multiple footsteps approaching from. The footsteps stopped. The silence was worse than the sound had been. A chemiluminescent flare ignited ahead, revealing Chun. He stood motionless in the corridor intersection, still wearing his torn vest. His head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and when he smiled, I counted too many teeth. "You need to see," he said in that stretched voice. "You need to understand." Before we could respond, he turned and walked deeper into the station. Harrison followed, without hesitation. Sarah started after them, and I grabbed her arm, but stopped when I felt the ridges developing beneath her sleeve. Marcus and I exchanged a look. We both knew there was nowhere to run. The elevator was back through the laboratory. The station had become a trap the moment we descended. We followed. Chun led us through passages I hadn't seen before, past laboratories filled with specimen jars. In the green emergency lighting, I could make out shapes floating in the preservation fluid. Things that might have once been human, but had too many joints, too many fingers. One jar had been shattered from the inside. The passage opened into a vast chamber. The original crew stood in a perfect circle around a hole in the floor, the same drilling shaft from the laboratory, but viewed from below. The original team who should have been dead for decades, their bodies showing those telltale ridges, their eyes reflecting our lights like a nocturnal animal's. Volkov stepped forward. His appearance matched the personnel photo exactly, unchanged after decades. "We were like you," he said in accented English. "Explorers, scientists. We found it sleeping in the ice, a colony organism older than multicellular life. It had waited for eons." The hole in the floor bubbled. Something vast shifted in the darkness below, a sound of wet stone. "It doesn't replace us," Volkov continued. "It incorporates us, improves us. We are still who we were, but also what we will become." I checked my recorder, still running. The organic compound. It's the organism. Spores. Fragments. Messengers. Volkov smiled with too many teeth. Your friend understood immediately. Chin moved to join the circle. Harrison followed. Sarah pulled free from my grip and walked forward as if in a trance. The ridges on her neck had become pronounced, pulsing with bioluminescent patterns I recognized from deep-sea creatures. Marcus and I stood alone outside the circle. I could feel the compound working in my lungs with each breath, a warmth spreading through my chest. My recorder showed the time. We'd been in the station for barely an hour. "The surface teams will come looking," Marcus said, but his voice already carried that distinctive harmony. Volkov shook his head. "They will find empty ice. The station exists only when it needs to, when it calls." The drilling shaft erupted. What emerged defied rational description. My mind tried to process it as a massive colony of connected organisms. Pale, translucent flesh that moved like liquid while maintaining structure. Bioluminescent patterns raced across its surface in complex communications. But that was only the physical component. What truly broke my understanding was recognizing faces in its mass. The features of the crew members repeated and interconnected, their consciousness distributed through the whole. The organism flowed around the circle, embracing each person like a returning tide. They didn't scream. They sighed in unison, a sound of coming home. Marcus dropped his medical kit, for ridges had appeared on his hands. "Upload the recordings," he told me, his voice fracturing into harmonics. "Tell them, warn them, or invite them. I'm not sure it matters anymore." He walked into the circle. I ran. The corridors shifted around me, passages opening and closing like valves in a vast circulatory system. My headlamp flickered, battery failing or something else. The organism's bioluminescence provided the only reliable light, pulsing to the translucent walls like a heartbeat. I found the laboratory by following the water flow. The elevator shaft was exactly where we left it, but the pulley system lay in pieces. Above, thousands of meters of ice waited. I'm uploading this log via our emergency satellite link. The connection is intermittent. The signal has to travel through ice that may or may not exist. My breathing is becoming difficult, not from exertion, but from the changes starting in my lungs. I can feel the organism's chemistry rewriting my cells, improving them for an environment I'm beginning to understand. The radio crackles with Chen's voice. Let it not rise. But I understand now. It's not a warning. It's a prayer. The organism has been rising for millions of years, through stone and ice and time. We are simply its newest iteration. My recorder shows later in the afternoon. The timestamp is wrong. We've been here for days, possibly weeks. Time moves differently in the station. I'm including our last team photo with this upload. Sarah took it just before we descended. 6 researchers standing around the borehole. Proud of our discovery. Study it carefully. Count the faces. Count them again. There were always 7 of us. The upload is complete. The station is calling me back. I can hear my team singing in harmonics human throats shouldn't produce. My hands are developing ridges. For parallel lines, perfectly spaced. We were never meant to find the station. We were meant to join it. Story 10. I found a window into hell. It doesn't really matter how I did it, right? Honestly, I think you could use pretty much any mirror you have lying around, as long as you know the correct procedures. Only, even if you ever found out how I did what I did, please, don't follow my lead. I think there's a price to be paid for everything in this world, and I'm afraid it has come due for me. There's a high possibility I won't be able to contact anyone again, but it's a risk I'm willing to take. One, I have to, if I'm being honest. This whole thing started 8 years ago. Shit, I only now realize how long it's been. Maddie disappeared in the spring of 2017, and our lives just fell apart. That first night, when we had to admit to ourselves that she wasn't simply wandering around out there, but that something had happened, was the worst of my life. Neither my partner nor I slept at all that following week, either driving along the roads we knew she had taken, or waiting by the phone for a call from the police, or maybe the person who took her. But we got nothing. No clue, no trace, no ray of hope. It was as if she had been swallowed by the earth. With every passing day and no new clues, I felt this abyss inside me growing more and more. I know my partner felt the same way. I could see it. Yet I couldn't do anything about it either. We weren't a team anymore. No. It was like this crack had formed with Maddie's disappearance. Both of us blaming ourselves while neither was able to give the other comfort. It was a really dark time. And after months had passed, we just gave up. I couldn't stand living in our house anymore. And threw myself first into work, then into alcohol, then finally into finding a way to find out what had really happened. No longer able to live with myself, I let madness consume me. Completely. It took me years and pretty much every penny I ever made before I stumbled upon something. At that point, I think my family stopped being scared for me and started being scared of me. I had called maybe twice a year, but every time it descended into ramblings and crying. No, I don't blame them at all for not wanting anything to do with me anymore. I don't think anyone should. You don't either, right? But in my madness, I found it. A way to see her again. Maybe, I thought back then, even contact her, wherever she was. I had to beg and plead with my family and friends for enough money to begin my experiment. And in the end, they finally relented, even if it was just to get me off their doorsteps. Yeah, I noticed the look in their eyes. All of them. Each and every one stared at me like some wild and possibly dangerous animal. But I didn't care then and don't care now. I got the materials, got the mirror, put on the table in this small and dirty apartment, and began the ritual. All in all, it took me around 3 hours before I finally felt it working, and for the first time, I actually looked into hell. It wasn't Maddie I saw, no, but an old woman, sitting on a dark floor. She was crying, screaming, I think. It's hard to say without sound, but I saw her mouth opening, her eyes going wide as she sat there, clawing at the floor, while the darkness around her seemed to move. Cold sweat was running down my back as I watched for what felt like an eternity. She couldn't see me. That much was clear as well. Her eyes were darting from side to side, looking for help, yet never finding any. The shadows were coming closer and closer. I lost my concentration after a few minutes, and the mirror stopped working. What I had seen just then freaked me out, of course, but it also gave me hope. I had proof it worked. Now, I only needed to find out if I could look at specific people. My grandpa, who had died over a decade ago, seemed like the logical choice. I took a short break, then looked once more, repeating my grandpa's name over and over again in my mind. And this time, as the mirror turned into a window, I saw him, a frail old man, standing by what probably had once been a cinder block wall. I could see him scratching it with his nails. Deep grooves marked the stones, while dark blood was running down and staining the floor. I screamed his name at the top of my lungs, but he didn't turn or look at me. His hands kept working, scratching, bleeding, as planned beforehand. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, then shone it directly into the mirror. The darkness of the place got pushed back, even if only for a little bit, and in that split second, my grandpa's face finally turned. I saw his eyes, wide with terror, staring back at me through the light. Tears were streaming down his face, and the shadows around him started moving. In the cone of light, I could see the hands reaching out to him, and to me, something grabbed the frame of the mirror from the other side, pushing it up, and I fell back with my chair, breaking the connection. My heart was racing completely out of control. As I rolled over and stood up again, only daring to look at the mirror on the table from the side. It was still moving, almost vibrating, while the cloud seemed to dissipate in its reflective surface, and the ceiling of the small and dirty apartment came back into view. I think that was the point when I realized it. The mirror had been turned into a window, and it could be opened, at least from one side. As much as this realization terrified me, it also gave me hope. I reset the table and mirror, then concentrated on Maddie. A part of me was still hoping I wouldn't be able to find her, that she was alive, somewhere out there waiting to be rescued, but I knew it deep down already, had known it for almost 8 years. And as I looked into the mirror and watched the surface turn black, then dark gray, I caught a glimpse of her, Maddie. She looked exactly the same as the day she had disappeared. Only this time, as I saw her, she was crying, running, silently screaming. My heart broke, and I called out to her as she raced by, looking over her shoulder at something I couldn't see, chasing her. She couldn't hear me either, but I touched the surface of the mirror and felt it for the first time. This coldness shot up through my fingers as ripples formed and my skin prickled. I could feel them sinking in, at least a tiny bit. But the shadows moved again as soon as I disturbed the window, and I had to jump back to quickly break the connection. Since then, this apartment feels different, but I don't care. I can see things moving in the corner of my eyes. Maybe I marked myself, cursed myself, or made myself a target. It doesn't matter to me. I've sent an email to my parents and siblings, apologizing for my behavior these past few years. Then, I sent one to my partner, forgiving them and myself for everything we could, should, or would have done differently. I felt it was important to clear the air, or at least try one last time. That email also contains my address right now, so they can find a book that will tell them how to set up the mirror. It's also why I'm posting this here. Maybe I want someone not involved to read my words, to understand why I have to do it. After seeing her, scared and running, I know I can't step back anymore. I will look for Maddie. I will climb into the mirror, and I fear I won't be able to come out again. If my partner ever finds this place, I'm not sure if I want to try and look her up as well. But it's their choice to make, not mine. What I can say for sure is this. If they manage to use the technique to set up the mirror and look for Maddie, they won't find her alone at least. I promise I will be with her from now on, running beside her, protecting her, as I failed to do while she was still alive. Maybe it's the madness talking, but I think I prefer hell at her side to the hell I've been living in these past few years. Then again, I don't know what will happen, but my time has come. Wish me luck.